All right, I think we are about ready to call to order the 68th public meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission today at the Boston Convention Center on May 30th, 2013. First order of business is the minutes, which of May 16th. Commissioner McHugh.
So the minutes have been distributed. I mentioned the last time that the minutes had references not only to the pages of the transcript, but to the places on the videotape where the discussion summarized in the minutes takes place. I neglected to mention that by simply clicking on the time, you're taken immediately to that portion of the videotape where the discussion appears.
That's fantastic.
And
Yeah.
Artem Shtatnov, our one of our members of our legal staff, has done a terrific job with that, and that's a big
So
help.
when you're reading the site, if you
That's
click
right.
on the time, you go directly to the
You
video
go
there.
directly to that discussion.
Wow, that's
Amazing.
Doesn't
great.
work on the paper, but
I know, I tried it. I kept pushing it. What do you mean?
but it's a terrific. So anyway,
great.
with that preamble, the minutes are up for discussion. Any corrections, comments?
Where is Elaine? Is Elaine?
She's here.
I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Elaine,
Back.
did you hear that? What Jim was describing about how the transcript now jumps to the video? Okay. If you're when you're reading the transcript online, and it says
The minutes online.
the transcript of the minutes, right? And it's now enumerated by the time the conversation begins. If you click on the time, it jumps to that part of the video. So it makes the video essentially searchable to a fairly fine. I just think it's something that the press might want to be told about. It's a really, really powerful tool. Sorry for the distraction. Any comments on the minutes?
Very well done, as always.
I had one question on page 4, the motion itself, in the 4th line down, it says an RFA application without paying the $400,000 application fee to the extent not necessary to cover the supplemental investigations. I know what that's trying to say, but I'm not sure it does say it.
Okay, let's that was unfortunately the text of the motion.
You're right. Well, maybe it's okay if
And so,
I think it's
no.
clear.
Do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
If there's additional costs, that's what.
yeah, I know what it's trying to say.
It's
but
aimed at. It is phrased a little awkwardly.
Yeah.
I agree. It comes through. We could make another motion today and fix it. But I hate.
I don't think anybody's going to argue about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's, okay.
All right.
So forget that. All right, do we have a motion?
So, unless there are further comments, I'd move that the minutes of the meeting of May 16, 2013 be accepted as tendered.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, excess, we have to vote by
Oh,
roll
that's right.
call, sorry.
That's right.
So we're vote by roll call. Commissioner Zuniga is in Las Vegas at a problem gambling conference, but is with us by telephone. Commissioner Zuniga, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins?
Aye.
Commissioner Cameron?
Aye.
Commissioner McHugh?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
He waited for the.
Yeah, he's a delay. Okay, we are now on to our second item. Commissioner Stebbins, do you want to introduce our guests?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. We know the statutes focus on these resort casinos and slot parlors to have a positive impact on small businesses across the Commonwealth, and why we certainly expect our licensees will source the usual group of vendors for spending items such as landscaping, limousine services, linen, etc. We also want to encourage our applicants to think somewhat outside the box and consider those small business sectors that are exactly that. They are small businesses. We've talked a lot about assisting our licensees with support and potential incentives we would offer other businesses seeking to start in Massachusetts. If we were looking to help a new business make some business connections, I think the next two presenters would be key people we would reach out to. The folks we have here, Helena and Mary and Catherine from the Department of Ag, represent just two sectors that could be positively impacted by the introduction of resort casinos and a slots parlor here in Massachusetts. They represent the creative economy industry in our Massachusetts Department of Agriculture and related products. I've invited them here today to talk about the size of these two sectors in the Massachusetts economy, as well as how they can be a resource to our applicants to, again, help them connect with small businesses across the Commonwealth. So we'll start with Helena Frucia. She is the Director of the Creative Economy for the Massachusetts Office of Economic Development. And she'll make a presentation. We'll follow that up with Mary Jordan and Catherine Durand of the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. So good morning, Helena.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
And thanks for the opportunity. I think working with the creative economy, has so much opportunity there. So first, I am the Creative Economy Director for the state. Usually the second question that is asked once I say I'm the Creative Economy Director, the second question is always, what is the creative economy, Helena? What does that mean? Who do you include? How do you draw the line? So what does that mean? So usually I explain the creative economy has four key important parts. So the first are cultural nonprofits. So these are museums, theaters, theater companies. These are usually our anchor arts institutions in so many of our communities. So I think that that's usually something that people include. The second part isn't always something that people pair together, which is the for-profit businesses that either provide a creative good or service. So this is anything from advertising and marketing. This is design, industrial design, interior design, video game development, publishing, as well as entertainment, music, visual art. So these are actually paired in our definition of the creative economy alongside our nonprofit arts institutions. So, and there's quite a few of those businesses, and there's so much opportunity for growth there within the state of Massachusetts. The third part I always include is sole proprietors. So these are writers, actors, individual artists, freelance graphic designers, as well as the creative talent that works for non-creative companies. So let's say a marketing director at a bank. The bank isn't necessarily as a whole considered part of the creative economy, but the creative talent that works for them is still, we're able to count that as part of the creative economy. So the final component, I always say, is the creative communities in which they live. So I work with municipalities, I work with regional economic development corporations. Obviously, the whole state is thinking about and using and working with the creative economy that is here in the state of Massachusetts. It's a very robust sector. And it actually accounts for 100,000 jobs within the state of, over 100,000 jobs within the state of Massachusetts. So that's accounting for the nonprofits, the for-profits, as well as that creative talent that exists within all of the various parts of our economy. So usually when you see the creative economy, or when you talk about it, there's usually the bubbles, overlapping bubbles, those sort of descriptions, which basically what I like to say is the creative economy sort of infiltrates into all of the various parts of our economy in ways that we don't always think about. So let's say in a manufacturer, I put up a picture of Puma, that, you know, their sneakers aren't just made and manufactured here, they're also designed. You know, design gives so many of these manufacturers a competitive advantage in their industries. You know, all you have to do is take out your cell phone to see where art overlaps with technology. I talk to my video game companies, and half of their team are people in technology, but the other half are artists. It's a visual experience as well as a technological experience. And oftentimes, when we're talking about travel and tourism, so these are major industries within Massachusetts, the creative economy is right there. Oftentimes, you're going to those theaters or you're going to the museums as you're thinking about Massachusetts as a destination. So we really do infiltrate into all of these various parts of the creative economy, or into the economy, period. So the last part of the creative economy and why we focus on it from the state perspective is when a community has the creative economy, it oftentimes is easier to attract and retain both talent and companies. I call this the Richard Florida effect of the creative economy. So he wrote a book called Rise of the Creative Class, understanding that communities that really embrace, cultivate, work with the creative economy and the creative class are really more viable for economic development in general for this creative talent and the businesses. So what does that mean? How does that work? So I sort of want to bring that home into Massachusetts, talk to you about some of the examples of where the creative economy was used, I think, in a really inspiring and interesting way. One of them is actually from the building that we sit in, so when I got the notice that we changed spaces, I'm like, how apropos. The BCC actually worked with a local organization that I have a sheet of follow-up sort of contact information for you, which is called the Boston Cyber Arts. And they used the marquee, so the large structure that has the screens out front. They didn't just use that for advertising, they also used that to work with Boston Cyber Arts to feature local artists, but more in the digital realm. So we're not just talking, painting, we're not just talking design, we're talking people using, working with, so Boston Cyber Arts partnered with the BCEC, and they have art on the marquee. So this year they did video game inspired art, and they really infused, so they have, I think, about 20 different artists painting that scroll at all times on that marquee. And I think that was a really interesting way of bringing that visual and bringing the creative economy, making it more visible, making it an important part of such a visual marquee here in Boston that it was a really, I thought, inspired way of including the creative economy where it might not have been before. The second one I want to talk about is actually with Logan Airport. An organization called Design Museum Boston did an entire design-inspired exhibition about all the facets of travel. So they did a comparison, the design facets of travel. So a comparison of what people used to wear when they traveled, got all dressed up, and it was something that you really felt like you needed to come to the airport, in your best attire. Where today it's all the hoodies and the sweatshirts, and or how luggage has changed, or how the airplanes themselves have changed, even the signage in the airports. So understanding where design really infiltrates or work with our communities. And I also just wanted to tell you about some of our innovative companies. So my third example, so the art on the marquee, this design of travel, it was such an interesting way of really going into unconventional places. But the other thing I just want to mention is some of the creative companies that are here in Massachusetts that are doing projects all over the nation that are using design. So one I want to tell you about is Artaic, that's actually right down the road here. They have developed a robot that actually helps develop mosaics. So if you think about a picture, each picture has a pixel. And they realize that a pixel also equals a tile. So the robot actually can identify the tile colors that makes mosaics into actual renderings of pictures. It's very clean. You can really see the difference of that. And it's not a guesswork, it's actually the robot that picks those out. So they've been doing mosaics. I actually have a visual of one of them in a restaurant that they've done. We also have companies in Massachusetts who have developed tabletop games that are being used. The example that I put up is actually being used in Japan for horse racing, that they actually developed the interface that you can stand around and play and bet and make those happen. I thought that was a really interesting example of Massachusetts innovation. Also just sort of the effects of a space design, using our technology, our designers, our innovators as we're thinking about how the spaces are designed or thought out, or the use of public art, the use of art in these spaces. You know, they're going to be quite large, I'm assuming. So understanding how design really can work in the casinos, or how they're thinking about using the creative economy locally, because we do have some immense talent, not just in sort of the traditional design, interior design, architecture, you know, that definitely is there, but also in the public art aspect, the use of technology, the use of games. So I just wanted to come and say that this is how and what we're thinking of for the creative economy. So I have put together a sheet that sort of outlines some contacts, as well as myself, if anyone is interested in really understanding, thinking about, and connecting with the creative industries of Massachusetts in any format. I've sort of highlighted design contacts, technology contacts, public art contacts, and then obviously I'm here and happy to connect with and work with anyone interested in connecting with the creative industries.
What's your background? How did you get into this?
So
job?
I'm an artist by training, but I previously ran something called Berkshire Creative Economy Council in Western Massachusetts, where we created a model for regional-based creative economy development in a rural community. Oftentimes we think about the creative industries in urban settings, but it's not always the case. There was over 6,000 people in the creative economy in the Berkshires. And really no economic development strategy around them. So I worked sort of on the more grassroots end before I now work for the state and help municipalities and regions really thinking about the creative economy. So this is kind of a unique presentation for me. I was happy to be able to do that, but I'm astounded on a regular basis of the innovation that happens in Massachusetts, of the creative companies that are innovating and thinking of new ways and new designs, and I just was really thankful to be able to give this presentation.
You know, you mentioned a couple of examples of things that I think we've all seen. The sea creatures, for example, on the floor of the passageways at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
There are crosswalks downtown that have embedded things down at Haymarket. The bronze pieces of fruit and things that are embedded in
Garbage.
Yeah, the garbage. Well, no, it's pieces of fruit.
Get it.
Yes.
Used fruit. How do you approach individual companies when they're building things? What's your approach to getting people to think about this? Because I suspect that particularly with out-of-state entities, they would have a design team that they put together, but they might not necessarily think about the local designers and things to use here. So
Right, and so I think it depends on who's approaching me. If it's a municipality, because that is very specifically public art,
Right,
some of the entities
right,
that you
right,
mentioned.
right.
I think that understanding how to use public art and how to really approach it thoughtfully. I've actually included public art guidelines, a link to public art guidelines. So if it's sort of outdoor space
Right.
or even internally, I really wanted to make sure that we had a thoughtful response to how to really do an effective call for public art, or how that interfaces with the community. So I think we have some resources from the state of Massachusetts from that perspective. Most of the times, if a company approaches me, I send them to this list that I sent you, mostly because as a public employee, I'm not allowed to make specific recommendations for you should work with X company, but I have a good network of people who are really able to discern and interconnect into the talent base that is here in Massachusetts. So mostly I approach this from a perspective of saying you should understand and use the creative economy that is here as much as we can say that, and then give them effective vehicles by which to interconnect into it. But I think that in some ways they're very hidden, and that's part of my job, is to bring visibility and also mechanisms by which people can engage with the creative
So
industries.
if somebody, how does somebody find out about you? If you Google Creative Economy Massachusetts,
Massachusetts.
will that
Yep.
find you?
My email and my information.
So, okay.
And I also put my website on the contact information. Here's also for the
No,
PowerPoint.
I know it's there.
Mine too.
but
So
I'm-
yes, if
I'm
you Google
thinking about-
Massachusetts creative economy or creative industries,
Right.
I'll come up.
Right, okay, okay.
You mentioned that you had been thinking about casinos and possibilities to connect. Could you elaborate on some
Certainly.
of those thoughts?
So I think there is sort of the opportunity to connect with local design firms, also local public artists. They can do specific calls for that. I was working recently with a foundry up in Chelsea that does bronze casting, and they were, there's different ways by which they can do that. So I think that sort of the experiential design is kind of what I would talk about that as in the airport when you're walking through and you see all of those elements. I think that the use of those in these spaces could be very profound. Also, just from an interior design perspective, we have world-class designers. We have the Boston Design Center just down the road here. I think there's multiple ways of engaging with the creative economy, and I also think that there's creative ways with engaging in the creative economy, which is why I sort of mentioned the sort of gaming tabletop aspect, the technology aspect. So I don't want to just think of this as painting on the walls or, pieces that we might include as you're walking through the casinos in an experiential way, which I think is a very valid way of thinking of working with the creative economy here. But I'd also like to think about it from a technology standpoint, because that's where Massachusetts just really blows everyone out of the water. I mean, we're so technology savvy. If you just go over to the Media Lab at MIT, it's just, we're creative in thinking about new ways to engage technology in this discussion as well. And also our video game cluster, we have the 4th largest cluster in the US that are developing, everything from Dance Central in Massachusetts was made here, to Lord of the Rings Online. So there's so many, our video game companies are pretty profound too here as well. So I guess I was thinking of this in multiple ways, and that's why I really did try to think about it not just from the art perspective or the design perspective, but the technology perspective. So I think each of those ways are very relevant ways of engaging with the creative economy.
I'd like to find out more about what that robot does, but now is not the
Sure.
time.
There are two parts of our evaluation criteria, which we've been working on for months now, that directly relate to much of what you've talked about. One is obviously the whole economic development side, which Commissioner Stebbins has been leading, and he'll be leading the evaluation of that dimension. But there's a lot of talk about supporting small businesses and interacting with existing amenities and tourism and so forth. A, and then B, there's this general criteria, and one sentence from which I want to read you. In addition to this basic structure, which talks about finance and economic development and so forth, we've tried to articulate our aspiration for something more, something unique, something special, something innovative in the architecture of the gaming industry in Massachusetts. There are criteria that we will be using to judge which one we want, which licenses, who we will award them to, that could be enhanced by many of your constituents. And if I don't know if you have a communications mechanism with your constituents. I mean, I'd urge people to go to the casino bidders who are all putting together their proposals, their sites, and they're trying to come up with these innovative ideas that they know we're looking for. We ask about how do you enhance the Massachusetts brand in some way? How do you merge with it as opposed to fight with it? We can. John Ziemba behind you can give you the contacts for all of the bidders, many of whom are in the room.
Great.
But people should go to them with ideas about any of these kinds of things you're talking about. I'm sure they're all open-minded to hearing really creative ideas that will suit your industry and conform with our evaluation criteria.
And I'm happy to support managing that process too, or making sure that they're reaching the creative industries to have that conversation.
Right.
I'm more than happy to have that discussion and really make sure it's a two-way street, that the creative industries can talk to
Right.
The applicants, and the applicants can
Right. We spend a lot
reach
of-
the creative
Right,
industries. So I'm
exactly.
happy to.
We spend a lot of time talking, whether it's communities or companies or whoever, saying, don't wait for them to come to you, reach out. you
Reach
know.
out. Okay.
And John can coordinate that
All right.
with you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
We do
have
have
a-
another evaluation criteria under building and site design, which specifically talks about integration of public art. So that's certainly something to keep in mind.
Right.
Great.
Just kind of a curveball question to throw at you. Building and site design will also contain components of energy efficiency, and I think everybody's perception of energy efficiency are really ugly solar panels or what have you. Have you seen any places in the country where that energy efficiency model is kind of connected with the creative economy model to make these things look more visually appealing as opposed to big clunky pieces of hardware attached to a building?
Right. Well, I think that most of the new construction, and actually our Boston Society of Architects is really on the cutting edge of a lot of these things. The executive director just got called to go give a briefing to the president about energy efficiency and design. So I think that, first of all, our Boston Society of Architects and the architects here are really well aware of how to aesthetically bring the parts of those discussions and make it visually appealing. I think that that's pretty, I don't want to say standard, but very much a part of what they see their role as being, is incorporating these pieces. So I know that that is totally part of how they approach the design of these buildings, and many of them are LEED certified, and it's important to incorporate that. Specifically, a building that I can name off of the top of my head, I don't exactly have that, this was incorporated in this way. I'm happy to look that up and think about that more and send out a note afterwards, but I think that energy efficiency and architecture go pretty much hand in hand these days, from the trends that I've been seeing and working with the industry for some time now.
Good, great.
Commissioner Zuniga, any comments? He's either in
There's a delay.
a serious delay or he fell asleep.
He may not have heard you refer to him.
Yeah. Enrique?
No, I'm sorry. I realized this was in mute. I was talking on a phone that has the mute button.
No, I was just inviting you to comment if you had any comments, but if not, we're,
Thank you. No, this is a great presentation, and I can see the streaming really slick. As I can see our speaker and
Great.
the presentation as well.
great, terrific.
Great.
Thank you very
so
much. Yeah, really
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks. We invite Mary and her team up from the Department of Agriculture. Before Mary starts, I want to thank her for pulling this presentation together so quickly, and she has also put us in contact with the Department of Fisheries, since obviously Massachusetts has a pretty viable segment of its economy based on harvesting fish and seafood, as well as even the element of growing a lot of fish stock locally, I guess.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Stebbins.
Why don't you
It
pull
is our
those-
pleasure.
Be sure both mics,
Okay.
if you have a soft voice, make sure you're.
Sure. We'll rearrange here a little. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. And it's my pleasure, I brought with me today Catherine Duran, who's our agricultural economist. And to start off our presentation, she's going to give you an overview of Massachusetts agriculture. And I think you're going to be a little surprised at all the wonderful products that are produced here in our state. Catherine?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for having me today. So let's see. Just a quick snapshot of what we have to offer. We have approximately 7,700 farms in our state operating on over 500,000 acres of farmland, and they're bringing in about $490 million worth of agricultural products each year. Our average farm is about 67 acres and brings in about $64,000 each year. However, we range from very small to very large, bringing in over $500,000. We have about 200 farms that are doing that. I do want to mention that we are ranked second in the nation for direct sales. So direct sales, we're talking about direct to consumer. Those could include farmers markets, that could include a farm stand or CSA programs. But for your case, that also includes direct to restaurants. So we have a big trend in restaurants buying straight from farms and displaying those products
We're
proudly.
second in the nation in dollar volume or per capita or something?
Direct sales?
Yeah, in dollar volume?
Yes, dollars per farm. It's about
That's incredible.
25,000 per farm on average is coming direct from a direct to consumer, direct to restaurant sale.
So that's close to half of the total sales. Huh. Wow.
That's a
One
fascinating
fact I
statistic.
do also like to point out is that we are among the top 3 states in farmland value. So on an average, $12,000 per acre for farmland, which is at least top 3 in the country. Our biggest agricultural sector by far is greenhouse and nursery products. Second to that, cranberries and other fruits. We are second in the nation for cranberries, just behind Wisconsin. And then behind those, vegetables, dairy products, and livestock products, and aquaculture. Oh, thank you.
And aquaculture, did you say?
Aquaculture, yes.
And does that include farm-raised salmon, catfish?
So yes, aquaculture, our main aquaculture source in Massachusetts is actually shellfish farming. So clams and oysters.
Right.
We have, I think, 300 shellfish farmers, aquaculture farmers in Massachusetts. They bring in quite a lot of money. I think
Right.
Mary's going to share that statistic with you later on in the presentation. We also have a very large aquaculture farm out on the Connecticut River Valley that is doing amazing things. And again, Mary will talk about that later.
Okay.
So when we typically think about agriculture, we think about raw products, corn, soy. In Massachusetts, it's much more than those raw products. It is processing that we are huge with. When you combine agricultural products in their raw form plus processing, we're bringing in about $13 billion of output per year. $5 billion of that is value-added products. Mary will talk about this, but this is taking that raw product and creating it into something else, a jam, specialty meats, et cetera. Dairy processing is the top of our list, and they're bringing about $2.5 billion of dairy processing products. Our forestry industry brings in a lot of paper, canning, animal slaughtering, et cetera. Thank you.
I jumped ahead.
That's okay.
So sorry.
So I mentioned earlier the direct marketing component of Massachusetts agriculture. And what's really driving that direct marketing in Massachusetts is, first of all, our demographics. We have a population of over 6 million people, and our farmers have access to very important urban populations. And those people in the urban settings are really willing to pay a good price for our products. Due to the small size of our state, the small size of the farms that we have, we aren't really competing with the big guys out in the Midwest. And our farmers really need to be innovative, and they're diversifying their products. They are doing activities such as culinary tourism, inviting top chefs into their farms to cook with just their products, all sorts of things like that. In addition, in Massachusetts, we've seen this big trend in people really wanting to know who their farmer is. They want to know what they're doing, what their practices are. Are they environmentally sustainable? If there's a food safety outbreak, they want to know this is where my food came from. They want to have that relationship, and that's really been very important and helpful for our farmers. We've done a lot with energy, renewable energy resources, bringing that onto our farms, which helps to drive down the cost of production for us, which is great. And then lastly is just this huge demand for local products. People want to support their local farmer, and that's been just extremely helpful for our industry.
Has that been something that you all have promoted, or is it just the nature of the times that it's happening, or is it just liberal Massachusetts? Where does that come from?
I would say we definitely promote it. I mean, we want you to come and support our local farms, but I think it's more of a national movement as well. People really it's a change. You know, we've had these food safety outbreaks, and people are concerned, and maybe it's the downturn of the economy that people also want to support their neighbors. But yeah, I would say it's a national thing, but I think it's just happening sort of spontaneously.
Well, the stuff tastes better.
And it tastes
There is that.
fantastic.
Right.
Absolutely.
Tomato actually tastes like a tomato.
Yeah.
I was thinking exactly of tomatoes.
Yep, and it's fresh. It's wonderful. So I'm just, along with the food safety comment, I'm going to just talk briefly about one of our programs that we have. It's the Commonwealth Quality Program. And this is a marketing program that we have, and it's a label that producers can put on their food. Now, to get into this program, you need to meet certain qualifications. And if you meet it, you can have this stamp on your produce. And the 4 goals of this program are to, first of all, identify that it's a local product. If you go and you see this stamp on a tomato, you know it came from that farm. It did not come from miles and miles away. You see this stamp, you also know that this farmer has met state and federal regulations in terms of farming. Food safety, it has met all of the food safety things. That includes activities out in the field. It also includes activities when you're processing the food. And then lastly, to get this stamp, you need to be meeting certain environmental qualifications. So this is water requirements, how you're treating your soil, pest management type of things, what kind of chemicals you're putting on. So if you see this, you know you're in good shape. This is a little hard to see. But the program has 5 different sectors so far, though it is growing: produce, lobster, forestry, dairy, and aquaculture. And each of these sectors has its own documents that are written up. So practices that they must follow are specific to these different sectors. And the requirements include existing standards that are out there in the industry, and also collaborative research with some of our educational partners and other local partners. Because the way we treat food safety in Massachusetts, we might be doing totally different practices than what someone out in Arizona might be doing. So it's very specific to Massachusetts, but you know that you're getting a good quality when you get this stamp. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, and she's going to tell you.
Can I just ask you
Oh, yeah,
a
sure.
question? Do you make any distinction in any of your programs between genetically modified and non-genetically modified foods?
Not within the Department of Agriculture
Right.
programs.
Right.
Our farmers might in their marketing and their promotion, but not at this point with our department
Right.
programs. Okay, I just want to just go back just a second when you were talking about the driver of buy local, and as Catherine said, that it's really the changing times, the food safety, the food scares that we've had throughout the United States, and I think really society going back to local. I think of the main streets. I remember growing up and the malls were coming in, and now we're going back to the local businesses, patronizing those on the main streets of our towns. And that goes back to, I think, farming too, that consumers want to know where their products come from, and that's so, so important. We're finding that our farmers are businessmen, that for a dairy farmer, they're the veterinarian, they're the mechanic, they're the ones that are marketing the product, they're growing the product. So as we see times changing and we see consumers, again, wanting to know where that product is that they know they're going right to the source. And that's why we have over 250 farmers markets in the States. That's why direct marketing, beyond just direct consumer farmers markets, roadside stands, but direct to the retailer, the direct to the restaurant is so, so important. But as these things emerge, the consumers are interested in buying local. These are new opportunities for our farmers, and I just want to share a few of those. Our farmers are moving, as Catherine mentioned, from commodities onto selling directly, value-added, and selling their services. And when I mention services, the farm itself is unique. Many of us grew up with family members, parents, or grandparents that had the farm that we would visit. Now the whole experience of agritourism, and I won't go into that, but that is such an emerging business for our farmers. Selling that farm experience is really selling a service value added. But we are intrigued with our farmers are doing the diversification. Not just milking the cows and sending the milk off to a processor, but adding value. And as we talk about our cheese producers, we have about 32 farmstead cheese producers. They just established a cheese guild, and they will be marketing themselves to the retailers as well as doing the direct marketing. Our microcraft breweries are doing fantastic now using local products. We have such a demand for local hops. And we're working with the University of Massachusetts on research and other states to provide the best technical information we can to add value to our business. Our maple syrup industry is really thriving. We have over 300 maple producers that are selling not just to the consumer, but also to restaurants, to retailers. As Catherine mentioned, our aquaculture industry is so, so important with over 300 shellfish producers and also bay scallops, and the scallop industry is one of the leaders in the world. I'm going to focus on just some of the commodities. Massachusetts dairy farmers, we have 153 in the state, and we have about 40,000 cows roaming all over Massachusetts at their farms. But again, diversifying. Out of those 153 dairy farms, we have 9 that we call producer handlers, where they're actually producing the milk that you buy right on their farm. The others sell to cooperatives, such as Cabot Cheese. We have many that are part of the Cabot Cheese. We think of it as a Vermont product, but all the New England states contribute to Cabot products. Gorelick Farms is one of our largest processors in the state, as well as Hood. As I mentioned, we do have cheese producers that, along with those producer handlers, again, keeping the milk on the farm and making the cheese. It's become an incredible industry. Our produce farms, and that includes our vegetables as well as our fruits, such as apple orchards, the small berries. And a lot of our farmers are adding value. They're taking it one step further and taking those cranberries and selling them to Ocean Spray, to Deacon's Cranberries, again, adding value themselves by making breads, making chocolate cranberries, you name it. They're very, very creative. A lot of our squash producers, again, adding value, have set up processing facilities at their farms where they're able to cut the squash and sell it not just to retailers, but we have a very strong farm-to-school initiative of selling it to the schools, and again, also to restaurants.
Selling squash to schools?
Mm-hmm.
I bet the kids love that.
Squash, most definitely, yes.
Wow.
Another big project, I say project, it is, but is also, when they come back from the summer vacation, is corn. We have many schools that will have corn shucking contests to get the children involved. Again, taking it that step so they know where their products are coming from, what we grow. And that could be another topic. We're also proud of our livestock and poultry producers. We have about 100 farms that are raising quality beef, as well as poultry, pork, venison, lamb, and again, selling it to restaurants, selling it to retailers, specialty niche shops, and this is a growing industry for this. We talk about our wine, beer, and spirits, and I don't want to get this wrong, but we have, I believe, 8 certified distilleries now in Massachusetts, and every day we have another winery coming in, a farmstead winery. We have right now about 36 wineries and over 60 craft breweries in the state. Again, to be called a farmstead winery, they have to be producing the wine on their farm with a majority of the product coming directly from their own vineyard or from their own farm.
Did I see a distilled drink there? Is there, do we produce?
Yes, 8 of them in
Really?
the state.
Producing what?
I'm sorry?
Producing what? What drinks?
Let's see here, you can tell I'm not,
All sorts of things.
yes.
Really?
Yeah, gin, rum, vodka,
I know that.
you name it.
I was
Okay.
going to say that, yes. And then, as Catherine mentioned, our aquaculture industry with over 300 shellfish farms, and we have out, as Catherine mentioned, out in Connecticut Valley, along the river there, we have a aquaculture facility that is producing one of the main producers of the barramundi fish, and they are selling that throughout New England and all over. And this is a great industry because down on the shores, there's about 1,000 acres of both intertidal and also subtidal land that's being used. And once those products are harvested, then they're also, they take the seed and put it back into the land. So it's a renewable project that continues on. One of the things we had mentioned before is culinary tourism. That has really grown. It's taking those local products and giving that experience to the culinary traveler, to the restaurateur, and we have a very strong program called Savor here in Massachusetts. Again, working directly with the chefs, with the restaurant owners, and we have a chef on our staff that works with the restaurants to create those wonderful menus incorporating local products. So that has been a tremendous program. I wanted to bring up the resources that we have for the farmer producers. Besides the Department of Agriculture, the Division of Markets, we have 8 regional buy local organizations that work with the farmers and producers in their respective areas that again help partner these relationships with retailers, with restaurants, you name it. And we have one in the Metro Boston area that we worked with to help get local products into the convention center here, working with the food service folks. So that's a great partnership for farmers as well as for us. As Catherine mentioned, we have the Commonwealth Quality Program, which is really verification of where your product is coming from. We also have one of the oldest logo identification programs in the country, the Massachusetts Grown and Fresher program. The farmers can put that label on their products that's saying that this product was produced in Massachusetts. We have a lot of point of purchase material, creative visuals that we give to restaurants, to retailers to use, and letting them know, their consumers know that the products here in Massachusetts are obviously local and fresh, and we work with the consumer, or I should say the retailer or the restaurateur, to develop those point of purchase materials also, if they like. So I hope we've given you a quick overview of what's available here in Massachusetts. And we have a team, really in our department. We're all a team, but in our Division of Markets have a team that work with the farmers and producers and also the buyers of these products. So any of your applicants that are interested, or if we reach out to them, we would love to have dialogue with them on the various opportunities there are.
That's great.
Fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating.
The same things that we said to Helena would apply here, that many of our criteria relate to, again, to what you're talking about, many of our evaluation criteria. And John Ziemba can give you the list of contacts, and
Okay.
you and/or your constituents should reach out.
Okay.
Don't just wait for them.
All right.
Because I think you're offering precisely the kinds of value add that
Mm-hmm.
we will be looking for from our bidders. Now's the time to talk to them.
Excellent. Good.
Great. It was fascinating. Anybody else?
No, that was very, very helpful.
Very
Yeah, it's really
informative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you.
and thanks for the maps, too. I'm going to take some of these tours.
Right.
You're talking to a maple sugar producer in
Yeah.
right over there.
Oh, wonderful.
Tiny,
Great.
tiny.
That's okay.
Not a competitive threat.
That's good. Yes, we gave you a packet of information,
great.
and
Yeah,
for the
thanks.
other folks, we have information out in the back for them.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Where did you get, you put these two things together?
Yeah.
What a great idea.
That's great.
Yeah, excellent.
Just thinking out of the box, that's really,
Yeah.
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 Okay, we are to item number 4, Executive Director Day, I think. Administration.
Morning, Chairman
Morning.
Crosby. and
Morning.
Commissioners and Commissioners Zuniga out in Nevada. Appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you this morning. We have, I'd like to just touch on just a few things with administration. We've been fortunate to finish the interviews of candidates for the Director of Licensing, and we're confident we're going to be able to move forward with some effective choices there. We've also been spending quite a bit of time working with strengthening our administrative functions, and as well start recruiting for a personnel manager to help us as we need to start bringing on greater quantities of staff. In addition, our suitability investigations are winding down at this point, so we've been spending quite a bit of time to fine-tune that process and be ready to file those reports for the Commissioner's review. In addition, of course, the next topic that I have is the scheduling discussions.
Let me just,
So-
a couple things. Well, RFPs for the various evaluation teams, are you going to talk about that, or could you just give us a quick update reminder on where they are?
Chairman Crosby, I was not going to talk about those in particular, but I believe Commissioner Stebbins or Commissioner McHugh would be probably in a better position on the status.
About where they are?
Yeah, financial services has gone out. In fact, we had a bidders conference the other day.
Right.
Building and site design RFP is almost done and probably going to be ready to be released. And then we still have economic development left. And also, I've been having conversations with Commissioner Zuniga about how we can move the project coordinator position along, whether that's an RFP or whether it's we might be able to do a contract, but still talking about the limits and trying to price gauge where we might fall within the spectrum and where that might push us into a full-blown RFP or simple contract. So we're trying to resolve that.
So the economic development RFP is where in the process?
Still pretty much in draft form at this point, but the other one is out, the other one is teed up, ready to go, and the third one is
Okay.
behind that.
Okay. And then just also the CIO and CFAO, what's your timeline for those two?
For the CFAO, that's in the executive recruitment process. So Commissioner Zuniga may have an update on that if he's spoken with them recently. For the CIO, that's now will be particularly on my desk here as I get done with the commission meeting this week and re-review the applications to request interviews.
So you've got the pool filled out already?
I've got quite a pool, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to narrow it just a touch.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great. Go ahead, thanks.
So the other topic is one we've been spending a lot of time with as well, is the whole schedule discussion, and John Ziemba here has gracefully volunteered to help me out with this discussion because he was also the one that started out in particularly the Region C draft. So a lot of that information comes from where John started, as well as I know all of you know that John has got quite a grip on host communities and surrounding communities, so he'll be able to help out there with answers to questions. Karen Wells is busily occupied at the headquarters office, so she won't be able to be here this morning, but John and I will do our best to fill in where we can if there are questions with her area, and I'm sure I'll pass that off to Commissioner Cameron too for some assistance if need be. With that, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is take those topics on the agenda really kind of all at one time, at least for my comments, and to go through the points that I'm aware of, okay, if that would be helpful, because they're all interrelated, and I think that's what we have been talking about is trying to develop them all and then bring them together to see how it all might fit together, right. Which I found to be very interesting as we move forward. So what I'd like to start with, and it's under tab 4, and pardon me, I cheat a little bit. I have enlarged versions of the schedule. I think that might be partially due because I just can't bring myself to wear those half glasses, so I have to have some bigger print. But it works. It seems to work that way. So the first thing I'd like to start with is just make some comments relative to the draft of the Region C proposal that's before you, and with it as well is, of course, the schedule diagram that you have, and then also a highlights of the revised draft schedule. So let me speak to those just briefly. First of all, the schedule that you have before us would have us publishing the request for applications next week, in essence. So it begins right away, and that's why our discussion is even more important here today. What it does, and I think we've had a lot of these discussions, is what our schedules are, our targets, it's our plan, it's our goal. A lot of things can change in between that may very well change some of those target dates. In this particular case, staff is suggesting a target date for a shorter period for background investigations for a likely reduced number of applicants compared to Regions A and B at 135 days. So we think it's realistic in this case, based on the competition circumstances, that this pool may not be too big. So we decided that that's kind of a realistic approach at this time. We can change that as time wears on. With that, the due date that we've indicated here for the RFA1 application is scheduled for August 31st, 2013. The RFA2 application date is scheduled for July 3rd, 2014, and the award date is scheduled for September 29th, 2014. And I think if you actually, this is kind of the refer back to those other schedules, I believe that September 29 date comparatively would be about 6 months behind our other regions in our planned award date. And one of the areas, as we've looked into this in detail, is the need to limit, we're worried about a little bit, the impacts on our current background reviews as the pre-application qualifier scoping meetings begin on July 18th. So we also have to have an investment of staff in those scoping meetings, and at the same time trying to do suitability information that's coming forward. So that will be a little bit of an impact that we'll have to deal with as well. And probably maybe a more concern is that there are some staffing overlaps in addition with the Investigation Bureau on the Category 1 suitability reports, which are scheduled to begin on August 5th of 2013 and are due to be completed by September of 2013 as well. So that period there will as well have some overlap while we're trying to get Category 1 reports plus Region C. Excuse me. The design of the thought of this process is to enable communities to vote on referendum after suitability reviews are completed. So hopefully the timeline is set up in that fashion if everything goes smoothly. Designed to avoid any summer elections. Potential surrounding communities have at least 4 months to execute an agreement after the host community agreement, assuming that agreement is executed early February 2014 date. As I mentioned before, this of course may be modified to extend or move more quickly depending on actual circumstances. It does provide 85 days for an evaluation period And that's actually an original estimate. That's, at this point, isn't a scientific estimate because we obviously is going to be really critical the number of applicants that are there. We'll have experience at least between the Category 2 and the Category 1 that we're presently working on, so that could shorten that period dramatically. Anticipates an award, as I mentioned, by no later than November 14th, even if there are surrounding community disputes, and which is about 6 months behind the other regions. And of course, provides existing bidders the opportunity, at least to a limited degree, to apply in the event that there are some that are rejected from a referendum or have not been able to move forward at their initial sites. And finally, and I think it's an important point, is it allows the commission to evaluate that there's a time period there, which is I think about 14 months, allows the commission to evaluate any progress made on the tribal gaming plan as well. So that's a brief summary on the proposal for draft, or the Region C, and then I'd like to move on to bring in...
Quick question.
Commissioner Stebbins, yes.
Obviously, because of the size of the pool, because of the fact that we're not doing, it sounds like a limited number, we're projecting a limited number of suitability investigations we're going to have to go through. And hopefully that does allow us to have suitability done before local referendum. But I'm assuming we're still not taking away a municipality's ability to conduct the process that Springfield and Everett are going through. If they choose to have that referendum before the suitability, they're still allowed to do that. We just think our timing is much better on this.
That's correct. That regulation still stands. That option would be there if a community wanted to move forward sooner, but at least the schedule provides that opportunity to wait.
Okay.
So John, you've thought more about this than anybody else, but as we talked about last time, to me the most critical decision is when the RFA ones are due with their, with their 400,000, right? And so 8/31 is the critical date. That means that's play or go home date. Right. So that means that from the time we decided basically in April, March, right? March 15th or something like that, we decided, okay, so April, May, June, July, August. So it's 5 months for people to get organized and have enough time to have the time to make a decision about whether to plunk down your money. Do we have any more feedback on the pros and cons of that date? I mean, generally speaking, that seems to me like enough time, but do we have any data on that?
Yeah, in the last day or so, and actually again this morning, I received some comments from an attorney that's representing a development interest in the Region C area. They were watching our conversation at the last commission meeting. They looked at the schedule that we were proposing then, and they noted that we were going to try to move a little bit more expeditiously in our discussions today. And what they noted was that the timetable that we proposed at the last meeting would have been rather tight for them to assemble all of the financing and all the backing of the backers that they're hoping for the development. And any move to move it earlier would also make it rather difficult for them to get the backing that would be necessary to move forward with the initial application fee and a project. So they said that this could potentially have a chilling impact on their application and potentially on other applications. One thing that they did note is that if the commission decides to move to an earlier date, as a compromise, and I'm just putting this out for consideration, not a recommendation, as a compromise proposal, they suggested that perhaps if you move to an earlier date, that there could be some sort of a waiver possibility, such that if there's a demonstration that an applicant is in substantial stages of achieving backing, that it could be extended for up to a month or so, the application date.
Is the 8/31 date earlier or later than?
The 8/31 date is earlier than what we proposed at the last meeting.
Right.
And they thought that the last meeting's date was rather tight. Any move earlier to this date
And what
would
was
be
the date
difficult.
we proposed at the last meeting?
It was
a month later?
10 2, I believe,
Yeah.
A month.
or 9/21.
Okay.
Look at that. But it was roughly 1 month later. What they did reference is that they have been pursuing a development in the area for quite some time, but up until we made the final decision regarding opening up Region C, it was difficult to make any progress with some of the potential backers of those developments because it was such a contingency. So it was very much starting with almost like a clean slate once we made that decision.
If just hypothetically, I don't know whether I think this is a good idea or not, but if we moved it back a month, moved it out a month to the end of September, it doesn't seem to me we'd necessarily have to change any of the other dates.
Well, if we moved it out 1 month, then you might further restrict the reviews, what we're allocating to our background checks.
Yes. Right. You drop that down to 100 days.
Mhm.
And that again depends on how many we're gonna get and how big they are, whether they're big multinationals or.
Yeah, our experience is that they wait until the deadline to submit.
Right.
No matter how far along they are and how long we've known about the project, that's our experience. And I think this is very similar, this one potential bidder, to what we went through with the other 2 regions. Meaning, there are people who are exploring but can't make the deadlines, can't come up with the financial, 400,000. It would seem to me if that's difficult to come up with, it's probably not a serious project. And how many did we go through where we were asked for waivers, and I think we had at least 4 or 5 that we denied because we did not see,
Yeah.
we
'Cause
did
I don't
not
think-
see merit.
I don't think, I didn't understand this request to be, we can't get our 400,000 together. It's so we don't know for sure if we can get our 500 million together. And we don't want to put down our 400,000 until we've made sure that we can get our 500 million, which I think is, I think that's reasonable. And I'd forgotten that we do have the mechanism for giving people an extension if we want to already. And we chose not to.
Extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I would, in general, I felt really strongly that we should replicate the oval process, basically absolutely. But I do think there's an argument for being a little bit less stringent here for a waiver, which is that they haven't had it anywhere near as much time as everybody else has had. Everybody else had from the time the legislation was signed, November of 2011, until the date that we required. But it's different in Region C. They have not had anywhere near the same amount of time to think about this. So I could imagine the idea of having a somewhat less stringent standard. And you might apply and we might extend it, we might not extend it, but being willing to consider the possibility that if you're waiting for your private equity partner to make a decision, that we would contemplate an extension.
But we have a regulation that has a unitary standard, and so that's a little hard to do. I agree with the underlying premise, but I would prefer just to bite the bullet now and pick another. I also think that competition in this region, as in all other regions, is a good. And so I would prefer to bite the bullet now and give a little more time, rather than try to squeeze a new standard into an existing regulation in a way that we haven't applied it in other places.
Well, I wouldn't have a problem changing the regulation, but I could go, I wasn't meaning that we should try to contort ourselves. I think there's reason to change or to amend the reg, but I'm open for either. I mean, it's sort of arbitrary. The difference between 5 months and 6 months is totally arbitrary. It's just sort of luck of the draw. Can you get your deal done or not?
Yes.
And it might take 7 months, not 6,
Right.
or it might take 3.
Right, that's right.
Well, and if we look at our experience from the other regions, they're still putting deals together,
Right.
this many months later.
Right.
I mean, they were willing to put the money down, and then were
Right.
confident enough that they'd come up with a deal at some point, so.
Yeah.
And isn't a firm deadline rather than a we'll consider it, isn't that a better prod to getting the deal done,
Yeah.
provided that the time is
Yeah.
reasonable?
Probably. Do you have the language? Can you get the language right there, of what our or Catherine, what is the exception? What is the waiver?
It was,
I think it's extraordinary circumstances, something.
We were thinking like if a tornado
Yes.
Right.
ruined your,
Totally out of your control.
Right.
It's very extraordinary, but then it starts rolling out or something.
yeah.
That was the kind of, those were, actually, that was one of the examples we used
talked
when we
about,
were
yeah.
discussing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree with Commissioner McHugh on this, that, you know, we've always made competition, our first priority is integrity of the process, our second priority has been competition. So, if somebody has raised this as an issue, a month is gonna help a little bit to not only that particular organization, but somebody else as well. So, I'm inclined to add a month.
so does that move the whole schedule back a month? Is that what we're saying?
Excuse me, Chairman Crosby and Commissioner Cameron. I would say, I know we've been in pretty deep discussions about this 135-day period anyway for suitability investigation, and so I would definitely caution that it shouldn't get any shorter. Part of this, I know the standard I understand is about 6 months, so we're crunching this down anyway. Then on the other side, if we're trying to recruit more people into the pool, then we make it even shorter. I just don't think it would be practical. So I would suggest if we do that we move the other end of the schedule. And with the understanding, of course, that we can always, if something happens, we can shorten that up, but we would at least accomplish the goal of allowing a little bit more time to get an application.
I don't know if we could shorten it up, because we get pretty serious pushback if we start moving deadlines back, but that's all right. I would go with the month personally. I would say push it out. And, you know, August is a tough month, you know, for people. That's, you know, and realistically, that's a tough month to pull deals together. So I think giving them September is probably a net gain. You're nodding your head, you agree?
I'm in agreement.
Commissioner Zuniga, have you got any thoughts on this?
Mr. Chairman?
No, did you say?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
fine.
Yes, I think extending the deadline for phase one does not necessarily extend the overall schedule,
I agree.
because it shifts the critical path goes through, after the deadline, it goes through 3 paths. It's the surrounding community process, the host community process rather first, the surrounding community, and then the suitability investigations. So we could shorten the durations of the host and surrounding community process, technically, if we extend the deadline for phase one.
Well, that's true. We could, that's really the phase, that's really shortening the phase 2 schedule, which as a practical matter shortens the HCA and the surrounding communities also. There is a, you know, I don't know that that's a big deal. I don't know. What do you think about that?
As you know, I'm always reluctant to take any days away from the host and surrounding
Yeah.
communities because they do need additional time. We did move this schedule. I note that there's a time period when you anticipate your surrounding communities to really get in depth in their negotiations is after the host community agreement.
Yeah.
We've pegged a date of February 23rd under this schedule for those agreements, but nothing prohibits applicants from having a later host community agreement, as long as it's 60 days before the application date. So if it needs someone executed a host community agreement later than the hopeful date of February 23rd, that could impact the ability of surrounding communities to reach an agreement if people follow what they've been doing in practice of basically waiting till the host community agreement is completed. So where I note that Commissioner Zuniga is correct that if you take a look at the schedule as it exists, there's definitely some flexibility in the middle there, but that depends upon an earlier host community agreement date.
Yeah. I think we ought to tack on a month and just bite the bullet and give it another month. Seems like sort of a moderate consensus.
But I think we have to look at the entire schedule because the dates are important. So I think what we're saying, if I'm hearing John correctly, is he's hesitant to do that, so that would push the entire schedule out 1 month and put them at 7 months behind the other regions instead of 6.
That's in essence what that would do.
And that's what I understand as well.
Yeah, I think it's 8 rather than 7 actually, but whatever. But it's only a month. I mean, I don't think that's you know.
Is there any other conversations with potential applicants that you've had?
No, I've not received any comments on the specific deadlines. I had comments prior to our meeting where we talked about the schedule, but we didn't receive any specific comment. People know that they can comment. I don't think we put out a direct solicitation of comments, but people know that they can provide comments, but I have no. It's a short answer.
Okay.
Unless anybody objects, let's push it out 1 month. Any commissioners object? Yeah.
No objection.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
And Chairman Crosby, that would mean we'd be moving forward with a plan to release the request for applications next week, if that can be done.
Yeah, the only thing there, and I'm sure this has been thought about, is to make sure, we got a letter from somebody reminding us, Plainridge actually, reminding us that our evaluation criteria don't quite fit for category 2, and we hadn't quite gotten to the point of realizing that. Is there anything we need to do about the regs, about the issuing of the RFA 1? Are the regs completely, the existing regs completely up to releasing that? We don't need to modify them at all? Okay, fine. Yeah, so I think, yeah.
So that would be the plan.
We're going for it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So that gets me to the next two items in this, and obviously this Commissioner.
Sorry, Rick, just to make sure. So we would move the 8/31 date to 30 days past September to 9/30.
Right.
And we would make the commission award, assuming no delays with surrounding communities, from 9/29 to 10, whatever it is, 30.
That's my understanding as well, and then we would release the request for applications for phase 1 next week.
ASAP, yep, great.
Mr. Chairman, we'll go back and double check the exact dates to
Yeah.
make sure that these dates aren't on a Saturday or
right.
whatever dates we
Right.
had
Right.
for the 1 month.
Right. Okay, great.
So keeping the Region C in mind, I'd like us to, if we're talking about the proposal, there was a proposal for the possibility of an early application date, December 6th, sticking with the December 31st date, comparing that, and then placing the Category 2 evaluation numbers into the schedule, and then sort of applying that process to the evaluation process for Category 1. So the next two diagrams and my comments will kind of hit pretty much all that material at one time. First of all, I think as we start, you have the two diagrams in front of you, and so I'll just point out which one of these may have something on them that would be easier to identify. The first comment I have is the length of the Category 1 evaluation process.
The interruption. Your conference contains less than 3 participants at this time. If you would like to continue, press *1 now, or the conference will be terminated.
Commissioner Zuniga, are you still there?
Yep. Okay, good.
Good.
Shouldn't want to lose you.
5-second delay.
So both of these diagrams show the length of the evaluation process to be extended to 100 days to compensate for the larger number of applicants, longer response to the applications, and a larger geographical area to cover with things like host communities. And I'll comment about that in a little bit more detail, that the evaluation thought as well. And what, for me, this kind of came a little clearer when I was starting to look at these two different dates and look at the time frame, and we have basically 74 days slated for the Category 2 evaluation process. And even at 100 days, that only provides an additional 30 days for that very complex series of applications that we anticipate and the larger geographical area. So I think at the very least it'll be challenging. The Category 2 evaluation process, you might note on both of them, is in the 74 days, and we reaffirmed that, as I understood, at the last commission meeting. And that could, then as well, the earlier 12/6 date for Category 1 causes the overlap with the Category 2 process.
Say that again?
Yes, one way to look at it is, if you look at, I think just to bring it home the best, if you look at the application deadline 06 December 13, if you look at that form and look right in the middle of the document, you see what really happens. The commission can find itself finishing the evaluation process for Category 2, the suitability process for Category 1, the surrounding community process for Category 2, and beginning the evaluation for Category 1 in essence, all in that same period. And it kind of jumps right out in the middle of the document if you look at it. If you trace the suitability process back, the Category 2 evaluation process, which is scheduled to end at 12/16 under what was at the last commission, and the start of the if we move it back 30 days on 12/6, the commission review of responses would be scheduled to start on December 7th. So it basically, and during that period of time, I think probably one of the major issues is the commission there's a lot of hearings taking place. There's public input meetings, host community meetings, possibly surrounding community disputes or settlements, and it seems like it may be a tremendous amount of activity to be able to move that back into early part of December. There are some pluses, though. Obviously, the December 12th date allows for about a month earlier of the Category 1 award, and if you just compare that to the December 13th date, the award date there would be April 10th. So obviously, if the date was moved back, it would provide 30 days possibility for the award to come in that fiscal year. With the earlier date, on the other hand, the communities lose 30 days, the surrounding communities, but now the surrounding communities do have that option to begin the involuntary process 60, or in this case for Category 1 it would be 90 days, for Category 2 60 days earlier. Leaving the 12/31 application date allows more time for communities and the commission, but does move that award date out to April 10th or April 29th in the event of any arbitrations. I can also just briefly talk about the evaluation process that's in that 100 days, and while you're pondering those, or if you'd like to stop here, I can.
Let me just make sure I understand. So you've basically, not arbitrarily, but you've decided that your recommendation is to amend the original plan and add 30 days or so, add a month basically to the evaluation. So that's a big change, and that's what's triggering a lot of this conversation. Because last time we looked at the schedule, there was 70 days rather than 100 days, right?
The Category 2 process was basically 74 days because of weekends. And so the commission looked at that in detail, and we moved forward with that plan for 74 days. The other previous schedules had an 85-day evaluation period for Category 1, which was really one that hadn't been changed, as I understand, from the original proposals.
Right. Okay.
So we did kind of an analysis, and I can cover that, to at least the main thought processes in that additional days, if you'd like me to do that before you move on, or.
But just where, we used to have, 12/31 was the original date, and then we had 85 days to review.
Correct.
That,
It was 12/31 was the application date.
Right.
And the award date that we previously had was February 26, 2014.
Right.
So it was actually an unrealistic 60-day period between the application.
oh, all right, so as a practical matter, we've really been talking mid-March anyway.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, which
Yes.
we did, I know what happened. There was a time when we were saying we would make these awards in February or March,
Correct.
and that got turned into February. So, all right, so that really isn't a change. So this 3/16 date isn't really a change. That's, as a practical matter, what we've been talking about anyway. Okay. But the extra month would make a difference. Okay.
Well, what do you mean by an extra month?
Well, if we, let me think. Well, the extra month from 12/6, if we push it back from 12/6.
But it never was at 12/6. It's always been at
12/31. Right.
The question is whether to advance it to 12/6.
Right.
Yeah.
But when it was 12/31, it would have been March 1st with 85 days.
I think that's right.
Yeah, okay.
And the additional 15 days pushes
Yes,
it out to
16th,
March
right,
16th.
Right, okay. So if we don't, yeah, okay. So if we don't save the month, pick up the month, how does it go? 1 month goes from 3/16 to 4/10. Yeah, okay. Okay. So your recommendation is what?
My recommendation is that we stay with a December 31st application date, and that we look at a realistic plan with the evaluation period being around 100 days as opposed to 85. I do have I can make just a couple of comments on the evaluation period. And there's 2 additional forms in your packet as well under that tab 4. One is basically the sketch of the evaluation process with some summary comments on the back. And the other is the chart, which kind of breaks that down in days per application, which should be right close to that as well. So the evaluation process that what this chart that's in here does really is take the evaluation process the commission looked at and evaluated at the last meeting, and removes the days as such from that because it differs from Category 1 and Category 2 depending on which set of applications we're looking at. But it describes the process and then comes back and also describes it in a diagram, describes the process, and on the back it explains that process. It talks about the licensing team, the introductory presentation, the evaluation teams, adds in the thought of the project coordinator, and the thought of the evaluation teams producing that information directly from the evaluation teams to the commissioners, and then commissioners holding at least a public hearing to accept that and listen to the evaluation team reports, and then most likely at least one additional meeting after that. So that's kind of a real quick summary of what we talked the last time. This puts it in final form to apply to both Category 1 and Category 2. The differences in that, and I'll just hit on the major points of the 100 days as opposed to 74, are looking with this set of Category 1 applications that come in, obviously much more material, much more complex, that it's more realistic to think probably about a 14-day administrative processing period as opposed to 7. In addition, if you look in the middle of it, it has some interesting numbers. It has a 28-day period on the one side, which is designed around the new approach that's in rule now to deal with the incomplete information, the response time allowed, and the potential. So that 28 days, there's no anticipation. Let me restate that. we're kind of anticipating that will not extend the process. But if in the end we were screening application material, toward the end of that screening period, we found incomplete information, the applicant, and it's not material, the applicant has 14 days to get it back in. So that's why the 28 there from the 14. One below that, the 22 is really designed, there's 7-day period if the applicant has an incomplete portion of the application which is material. So that's just to try to reflect a little bit of change there. It basically doesn't impact the overall time to integrate extend. The areas that would impact the time are down below that, and that's really covered by the public meeting period, because that's going to be probably much more extensive, and the host community meetings. So the public input meetings are up to 35 days past application. The public will begin the public hearing in the host communities at 42 days past the application, or from receipt of the application, and close the public hearing at 56 days by. That 56th, that date of closing the hearings is a controlling factor in the present regulation structure, because from that date the commission has 30 to 90 days to actually make a decision on the award of the applications, basically to deny a grant or extend. You can't extend it additional 30 days as I've read it. So that's where the rest of the schedule comes from. Then it allows a little bit more additional time for the evaluation teams to assemble their information, get them submitted to the commissioners, and in turn for the commissioners, once they receive that quantity of material, to be able to take some time to process it individually yourself, and then be able to come back and make award decisions. So that's kind of where the evaluation process gets a little bit extended. But like I said, 30 days as compared to is not a huge length of time, and I think we'll fill that schedule pretty rapidly. So that goes, that whole process as well goes back to the consideration of everything pro and con, although there are still those that will ultimately have objections. Is probably the December 31st date makes the most sense as well, from not compressing those schedules and allowing that evaluation process.
Right. And we're not, except for the construction trades, who I fully understand have a different perspective, we're not hearing anybody saying speed up now, right? The messages are pretty much, if anything, slow down.
Well, we went over a number of comments at the last meeting of the previous meeting. We still have representatives from Sterling, Suffolk, that were asking for an earlier application date of October. A number of different communities have recommended that we move forward, including Springfield, including Boston, and I think Revere had previously noted that we should move a little bit quicker. I don't believe that we received a comment from Everett regarding those dates. Since our last comment period, we received an additional letter from the city of West Springfield, from the mayor of West Springfield, in the last day, and the mayor asked, recommended that we not move forward the date by an additional month because it would cause difficulties in them putting together their application. And what the mayor noted was the difficulty in getting the local zoning determinations done in advance of the application, because of the natural reluctance that may be experienced on moving forward with zoning changes before you even do a host community agreement or have a referendum. So what they recommended, they said, please don't move the date moving forward from the 31st to early December, or if you did, please provide some relief regarding zoning.
We talked about this last week, but there is this issue of the trying to get the license fees into that fiscal year, into what that'll be, what, fiscal 2014, I guess, yeah.
Right.
And if we are on this schedule, then they would be due on May 10th. If whichever decisions we make on April 10th, the license deposit would be due 30 days thereafter, which squeaks under the wire. And
I mean, I would probably use the 4/29/2014 date, because there is substantial likelihood that we'll have at least one arbitration between
Right.
surrounding community or live impacted
Right.
entertainment venue.
Right.
The 30 days still squeaks in that.
Still squeaks in, yeah.
And
Okay, but I,
counterbalancing that is, when one looks at the detail, the number of days, and overlays that on what we're doing in the category 2, it is almost impossible to see how we could be doing both of these big chunks of both of these at the same time. And the second important thing that, to me at least, jumps out from these discussions is we really have to allow sufficient time for community input, both the community input in the hearings that we receive, time for the community to digest what the developer is proposing, and then for the host community hearings, we've basically got under this schedule a 2-week period to hold 6 of them, potentially, at various places around the Commonwealth, and it's unlikely, which is 10 business days, and it's unlikely that those are going to be one-day hearings. I mean, they may be. So already that is a lot to squeeze into the time periods that we have, and to try and overlay that with doing other things seems to me an invitation to break the schedule.
yeah, and, you know, I made my position clear last week, which is, you know, we have to do this right, and if we run the risk of missing the fiscal year, we miss the fiscal year. So I agree with you, Commissioner. Other thoughts on this? Any reluctance, any objections to going forward with the revised, which basically we're adding 40 days to our schedule, formally adding 40 days to our schedule. Doesn't sound like anybody's got a problem with that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, we could split the baby, if you will, and try to, in consideration of the fact that the last week in December is a slow one, and there's going to be, the licensing team is going to be doing the administrative review. That team the deadline could be somewhere in mid-December, let's say, or also December 20th, and would be essentially splitting the time.
Well, so what you're basically saying is, you know, is the week between Christmas and New Year's sort of a lost week, so let's not pretend that it isn't, and let's make the deadline right before Christmas?
Yes, that's essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't know, that might not be a bad idea. I don't know, in the sense that everybody, you know, they're going to make the deadline. Whenever we make the deadline, they're going to make it, and everybody's going to be doing what everybody else is doing, which is the last minute, trying to desperately get everything done. It might not be I don't know. You could look at it 2 ways. It saves the evaluation team from having to start going to work, you know, between Christmas and New Year's. I don't know.
And I wasn't exactly clear on, I understand the additional time, but why were we hesitant? We thought we had too much to do to move it up to the 6th. I wasn't really clear on all the reasons for not moving it up. And that would, if we did that, I know that would make up for the rest of the schedule where we see we need additional time. Is there a...
Well, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Cameron, I think the primary reason is the overlap of schedule, even from the commissioner's standpoint. And if you look at that schedule, the suitability process, if you look at essentially the one that has the December 6th, what you end up with is the suitability determination and possible hearings come at the same time as the evaluation period for Category 2, and then you moved up the commission. If you go with the other application, the commission reviews on Category 1 come in December as well. So you've got that, and then that's not it. You've got the other parts of the surrounding community potential hearings with the Category 2. You've got termination of suitability pending there as well, and surrounding community issues beginning with Category 1. So it just seems from the aspect, and right in here is when the commissioners would be completing the host community hearings on site. Those are all are called for to be at the host community location. You also have the public input meetings, which I think Commissioner McHugh already referred to as well, occurring at that same period of time. So for the Category 2 process. So it just seems not practical from a realistic application, from actually being able to accomplish all that at the same time. It's going to be busy enough with the December 31st date, but it does spread it out a little bit if you look at the December 31st date. And you know, I have these two. I'll just enlarge versions as well.
I do wear the glasses, though, Director, so
with my yellow circle, it kind of,
yeah,
that's how I ended up focusing in, that period is a little bit hard to discern at first until you really look at how we're putting that in. And then we, of course, are putting Region C beginning in there as well at this point. And I do have to say that while I understand that the 2 weeks, I would have to be very frank. I thought the Category 2 timeline worked out pretty good, because that allowed basically us to get Category 2 evaluations completed December 16th, and recognizing that period between Christmas and New Year's is a tough time to get things moved forward. So obviously what we'd be doing is calling on staff at that point to complete administrative processing essentially during Christmas week, which even from the aspect of any support that's needed, it's not just the commission, but that's going to be pretty tough to do. Can be done, but
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's better to let the bidders figure out how to handle Christmas week and let our people relax.
Well,
I said that for you,
in
Kevin.
In addition to relaxing, there is the potential under this that we've got something else. We've got cleanup work from Category 1 to do. I mean, the award date is 12/16. We potentially are going to have findings to make with respect to the bidders who aren't accepted. We've potentially got, depending on what happens in a surrounding community situation, the possibility of having to hold hearings there. I mean, we've got 30 days that pushes it back, but people could reach a surrounding community agreement earlier without going to arbitration, and that would trigger the need to have a hearing right away. So that whole thing on Category 1 for the negotiation process could shrink back and have us doing hearings during that period. So it seems to me to be safe. There's a substantive reason under the schedule to push this back to leave it at the 31st as well.
And Commissioner McHugh, I might add too that they will be preparing to receive all those applications on January 1 or January 2, essentially, to get ready to screen them, so that we're ready to go to have that completed and to the commissioners in 14 days.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing I'd note, in regard to a middle of December application date, when we recommended the December 6th date, part of that was recommended because we would give the surrounding communities that period of time in the beginning of beginning of December to submit their petitions. And if we put it in the middle of December, you would in essence be taking away a few days and putting it around the holidays, putting surrounding communities at a distinct disadvantage.
Yeah.
Our previous schedule sort of put a little bit more burden on the applicants, but we think that they might be able to deal with it a little bit more easily.
Right.
Yes, and we also would have, we'd have the community input meetings. If we had it on December 6th, we'd have the community input meetings during the week between Christmas and New Year's, which probably would not be favorably received by the communities.
The public input meetings, remind me how those work. What's the process there?
Chairman Crosby and Commissioner McHugh will call on to assist me if I'm describing this incorrectly, but basically the idea would be to go out to communities impacted and not necessarily saying the commission would be at every community around, but would have selected locations, probably not the full commission, but probably 2 commissioners to just go to that area and listen to public comment, not a decision-making environment at all, but just to listen to public comment. Those comments would be collected and then considered by the evaluation teams as the process moves forward.
And how does that different from the commission hearing in the host community, the required hearing?
The host community hearing is the required, and it has to be in the host community itself.
Right.
The public input meetings are not anticipated to be, that's with the applicant. In the host community meetings would be a hearing with the applicant, and there's, if I remember, 4 other groups that are supposed to be, if I have the numbers right around in there, that are supposed to be present during that committee or that meeting, a question and answer forum, those kind of things. The public input meetings would be just, the concept is just that, to listen to what those communities have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And then the commissioners, part of what the product the commissioners would have would actually be have questions and information from those meetings, so you'd have that background as you move forward with the host community meetings as well.
Is it likely to be one per application? Is that the idea?
No, you could have 2 or 3 per application, depending on how we wanted to set it up. And you could have 1 or 2 commissioners go, so you could have them going on in different locations simultaneously. The idea there, as Director Day said, is to gather information from the communities, have the applicants hear information from the communities, so that by the time you go to the public hearing, we understand where community concerns are in a real-time basis after they've looked at the application, heard the public presentation by the applicant, and can ask the applicants at those hearings meaningful questions that reflect what the community is concerned about. So all this is building up to inform us, so that we can have a really meaty public hearing, hearing with the statutorily required hearing.
Okay. Questions? There, on the page 2 of the directions, this I think is just simple. We talked about each applicant at the introductory presentation. It says an hour. We actually have said 90 minutes on your written instructions, your backup instructions here. So I guess we are agreeing with your recommendation that we do not move the date, change the date of applications are due. That will be December 31st. And we are adding 40 days to the process, partly just by recognizing a mistake before and by adding some time basically for the evaluation. Right.
That's what I...
Okay.
That's what I understand at this point.
All right. Okay. I think everybody's okay with that, then? So we don't need to vote on anything, I don't think. All right. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Great. Thank you. Nice job. I think we probably don't, I mean, when we get to the application form, we're probably all underestimating just what a project this is going to be. I mean, it's so, we will probably be very happy that you've added some days to that evaluation process.
That's right.
Thanks. agenda is Ombudsman Ziemba.
Mr. Chairman, I have three matters to bring to you today. The first is the Everett voter notification. At the last meeting, we reviewed this Springfield voter notification. Similarly, this voter notification form has been approved by me and our legal department to be in conformity with our regulation, and we think it accomplishes the mission that the regulation was written for. So I recommend this for the Commission's approval.
John, I had a quick question on page 2. I just don't know whether it requires any further clarification, but the second paragraph talks about the second part of the application process, phase 2. The last line says that process will begin following the election by the community. I just didn't know, we referenced suitability up above, but I didn't know if we needed to just put in that reminder that suitability is also a requirement before they can go to the phase 2. You would read that last line and think phase 2 happens right after the community votes, but actually we still await a suitability report.
I see what you're saying, yeah. Perhaps we could take this to the community and ask them to amend that.
So you'd say that process will begin following the election by the community and the commission's decision on suitability.
Correct.
Right, that's your point, right?
Right.
There's- Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good, that reinforces the whole point of the notification, actually.
So I can't imagine that they would object to that, so if the commission
Yeah.
makes that recommendation, we can bring that back to the
Right,
community.
okay. This we do need to vote on, right? Any other discussion? No, we don't have to vote on no
No,
discussion?
no
Yeah,
discussion, not for me.
okay. Okay.
I speak for myself.
Somebody want to move? Commissioner McHugh?
Well, I move that the notification proposed by the city of Everett for the host community agreement with the amendment just described be approved by the commission in the form it presented to us today.
Second?
Second.
As amended?
As amended.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye. Commissioner Zuniga?
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins?
Aye.
Commissioner Cameron?
Aye.
Commissioner McHugh?
Aye.
And the chair also votes aye.
Thank you. The second item I have is we previously amended our regulations to allow direct payment to regional planning agencies rather than having a rather difficult funding mechanism of applicant paying the commission paying a community then in turn paying the RPA for the services, and that there are one of the major provisions that the RPAs wanted to make sure that they got in place when they first started these conversations was that the RPAs would be working for the commission, not for an applicant or not for a host community, that the relationship was direct. The documents before the commission today are a modification of our current community disbursements documents whereby we pay communities directly. In essence, we are scratching out where community appears in the documents and inserting in place thereof the RPA with one modification. There's two different forms. There's the grant agreement, and the grant agreement is something that currently we use with all communities to make payments to those communities. And that form would just be simply scratching out community and replacing it with RPA in that form. On the other form, which is the letter of authorization form, this spells out the actual services that would be provided. Instead of scratching out the community and replacing it with the RPA, we have added the RPA as a party to this. So the letter of authorization would need to be signed by the regional planning agency, the community, the host community, and the applicant. And the reason for the additional party rather than just scratching out the host community is that there's an important role for host communities to play in the regional planning agency process. Namely, we are asking them to cooperate with the regional planning agencies, such as through the provision of the studies that would be necessary. What this form also does, it provides a place for the host community to acknowledge that the services are going to be provided by the regional planning agency and ask them to agree to cooperate with the regional planning agency. So that is the additional language that we've included on this form. We submitted this to the regional planning agencies, and they really only had one comment of note that I've gone over with Council Blue. Specifically, if you take a look at Section 7, indemnification, the language currently reads, to the full extent permitted by law, the RPA shall indemnify and defend and hold harmless the commissioners, and employees from and against all claims, actions, damages, awards, judgments, liabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And what the RPAs have noted is that as a governmental entity, they do not have the ability to indemnify and defend. So what we do recommend is that we can remove those two words, indemnify, defend, and keep the remaining of the remaining part of that section in place, so that the RPA would agree to hold harmless the commissioners, agents, et cetera, but it wouldn't have the indemnification or defending language. And then the only other comment that they had was just to provide a little more specificity on their enabling act, which was MGL Chapter 40B, where we would include the section numbers, et cetera, but that's sort of window dressing a little bit. So in that regard, I recommend these documents to you, and I pose one question on whether or not, if indeed there exists any circumstances where we would have to amend, a section of this or words, whether or not it would make sense to bring this to the commission, or whether or not I could work this out with the executive director and the general counsel.
You mean the execution of?
No, if we needed any further modifications based on something that would be unanticipated, something that wouldn't violate the spirit of what the documents include, whether or not we should wait for those for the next commission meeting, because sometimes there's a timeliness issue, and if we have to wait for the next commission meeting, it might pose some difficulties. We can work around that, obviously. I don't think this is a tremendously important recommendation or question, but if it wasn't violative of what we're contemplating here, perhaps we could consider that.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, you would know if something was important enough that you needed to talk to us about it, and I certainly have confidence in that.
The only question I have on the indemnification proceeding is there something in here that says that the RPA is not the commission's agent? I mean, those two sort of go hand in hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're not our agent, and it's clear that everybody understands they're not our agent, then the need for being held harmless or indemnified is dramatically reduced. I must say I didn't read it with that in mind, because I didn't know that was an issue, but
I don't know, Catherine, if you have any thoughts on that.
We can look at the agreement to determine if that's in there, and if it's not, we can add that. That's a pretty simple change to make.
okay. And I think I'd recommend that we do that, to just put up another layer of insulation, particularly since.
Does it, just because we say they're not our agent, does that make it so?
No, but it at least that you can always have apparent authority, but it takes away express and implied authority to act as our agent.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so it doesn't immunize us forever, but it reduces the risk.
Okay. Fine. You want to move?
That I move that we approve, that the commission approve the very carefully thought out grant form and grant forms for RPA assistance to surrounding and host and surrounding communities in the form presented to us with the modification to Section 7 and with the addition, if necessary, of a provision explicitly stating that the RPAs are not the Commission's agent.
And authorize.
And authorize any changes in particular cases, authorize the executive director in consultation with the ombudsman to make further changes to the extent necessary to meet particular circumstances, provided that those changes do not alter substantially the content of the agreement forms.
Second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Yay or nay? Commissioner Zuniga?
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins? Aye. Commissioner Cameron?
Aye.
Commissioner McHugh?
Aye.
And the chair also votes aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask Mr. Robert Hubbard to join us.
Welcome.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Robert Hubbard, who has been appointed the chair of the Gaming Policy Advisory Commission by the governor. Rob, we have a bio in your packet, but Rob recently retired from the positions of the Director of Community Development and Planning for the City of Gardner, and he was the Executive Director of the Gardner Redevelopment Authority. He worked for the City of Gardner since 1989, except for a 3-year hiatus when he established an Economic Development Office for the town of Air, during which time the Devon's Reuse Plan was prepared and adopted. Most recently, Rob prepared an urban renewal plan for Gardner's Mill Street corridor and blighted former mill complex targeted by the Patrick Murray administration for redevelopment. US EPA and Mass Development have committed $2 million to remediate environmental contamination and to implement the reuse plan, which will facilitate creation of more than 250 private sector jobs. Prior to working in Gardner, Rob spent 12 years working as an economist and planner in Botswana, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Robert has a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from American International College and a Master of Arts degree in economics from Northeastern University. Rob is a past president of the Massachusetts Economic Development Council and currently serves as chairman of the trustees of the Memorial Congregational Church in Baldwinville. And I've asked Rob if he'd like to give a few comments.
Well, thank you. I'm excited by the governor's appointment, and I look forward. I understand from John this morning that the 8th member of the Advisory Policy Council has been appointed, so there is now the possibility of a quorum, and we can move forward with establishing a first meeting so that the commission can get the advice that's called for under Chapter 194 from the advisory committee. And so I hope to, I've noticed today that when something needs to be done, the chairman says, well, you can talk to John. So I think probably he will tell me that I need to talk to John about assembling the committee to get together and take on its role under Chapter 194.
Great. You might mention, do you have the list of the other members? Why don't you read those out?
Sure. We were notified earlier this morning that Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante from Gloucester has been appointed as the House member, as the House Speaker's member. She is the Vice Chair of the Joint Economic Development Committee. Representative Angelo D'Amelia is the other House member. Hillary Jacobs from the DPH, that's the DPH representative. Senator Flanagan and Senator Ross from the Senate. and Brian Lang, the representative of Labor, in addition to you, Mr. Chairman, as the other sitting member. There is also a representative of a tribe that is outstanding, and then there are 6 slots that are reserved for 3 for licensees from the 3 regions and 3 for host communities of the 3 regions. And we don't anticipate that those 6 obviously will be put in place until after we make our license decisions. So we will be operating with a little bit of a razor-thin quorum, but I guess that's one of the challenges we'll have to overcome.
Well, but also as a practical matter, I mean, this is an advisory committee. You're not going to be taking votes that have, you know, any standing other than as advice. So I don't think, you know, meeting without a quorum isn't going to really, you know, be the end of the world, I don't think. I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about expectations for this. The law requires that there be such a committee, and there are a couple of very important subcommittees. Public health, I think, or problem gambling, and community mitigation, I think, right. And those have pretty significant roles, so it's important that those get going. But the law says that your committee needs to meet at least once. So it anticipates that this could be kind of a non-entity of a committee, or it could be much more active. And I think as we have talked about it, I think we would like to see this play some substantive role. We don't want for outreach, and we don't want for transparency. But I think the more kind of feedback we can get from the field, how are we being perceived? How are we doing? What do people think? How well are the issues understood? That kind of feedback would be really helpful. And on any of the big policy questions that come up, obviously that we wrestle with them so publicly that you know, we would certainly invite comment, and I think we could probably structure agendas that would put on the table for discussion some of the things that we are wrestling with. I wonder if other commissioners have any particular sets of expectations or thoughts about how you'd like to see this operate, what you'd like to get out of the committee.
I would just pick up where you were talking. I would like to see a regularly scheduled, quarterly, something, whatever, meeting with the chairman, and to get feedback not only on the things that are listed here that specifically are the responsibility of the advisory committee, but the insights as to other topics, either that we refer to them for comment or that they on their own make up. I think the diversity of this committee and the roles that they have could be enormously helpful to us in bringing some careful feedback as to how we're doing and to suggest areas where we need to do things differently. So I would hope this would be a robust, and I'm sure it will be energetic, but routinely meeting with us, committee.
I mean, my sense, looking at the law, that one of the key factors that the committee can play, and to get the committee together in a structure to provide the input, will have to do with community mitigation. Because I think the way it's set up, there's a mitigation committee for each of the regions, and perhaps the overarching committee can help to funnel that information and bring it back to you in terms of feedback from the representatives of the regional committees. So I would hope that would provide an impetus for people to see a route to get to you with their feelings and their recommendations. And if these regional committees and the overarching committee you know, feel that they have an ear from you, which they clearly do by the legislation, then that will give a reason for these committees to exist and to function as they should.
We might, what about the idea of having the regional committees, Commissioner McHugh, be a part of the public input process you were talking about?
I was just okay. Thinking about, that's a terrific suggestion, and I think that would add some heft to the public input process and would help us structure it and make it really a valuable part of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that really, I think it's great. We've talked about this before. John and his staff, Oliver, but he has the capacity to have more as he needs it. We will obviously staff you, and you're a volunteer, and we will take on the support work here, but I think we're all expressing the interest. We'd like this to be really a robust operation, and in some respects actually integrate it into our operations, to wit, these public input meetings. So don't be bashful about asking us, and it is through John, but don't be bashful about asking us for the support that you need, because you won't be able to do it on your own hook. I had a thought that I wanted to throw out there. The statute sets up the committee with a very clear intention of representing a set of constituent groups: license holders, host communities, labor, legislature, public health. We could consider adding a handful, 5 other people who are just thoughtful people, that we might know or know of, whose input might be constructive in this kind of role that we're playing. They wouldn't be formal members, they would be informal members, because the law sets out the formal members. But because this is just advisory, there's not going to be, we're just looking for a mechanism, an additional mechanism, to get feedback on how we're doing, and to get feedback on making big decisions. So I wonder whether other people, what you thought about that idea, and what other commissioners thought about that idea, whether that might enhance the, someone, for example, like from the woman who spoke from the creative economy, somebody with that kind of a perspective might be the kind of person we would suggest sit there, just because they're good, thoughtful, innovative thinkers. Do other people have ideas, or Rob, do you have an idea?
I think that makes sense. I was also wondering if in some of the people who are on the committee, perhaps I'll use the senator as an example, it may be that the senator would appoint someone who would be a regular attendee if we were having meetings and they couldn't always be there, because we really want thoughtful people, as you say, and so the more people we can bring to the table, the better we would be. And in terms of, I don't know what rules particularly control this advisory committee, but I think from as I understand it, because it's advisory, we have a fairly wide range on options on how we would set that up.
I think that's right, yeah. And you're not subject to open meeting regs, right? Yes?
Sure,
probably so.
I think they probably are.
You are subject to.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all the more need for staffing this then. Do you all have thoughts about whether we might want to suggest people to add on? A law enforcement person, for example, that's another example. The kind of, if there were a really good, if Kathy O'Toole were available, she would be exactly the kind of person I'm thinking about. That was just good thinker, particular area of interest.
No, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about it, but that makes sense to consider all affected areas, and to have input, I think is always valuable.
Okay. Well, why don't we think about it, all of us, and if we come up with some ideas, nothing's locked in stone here, but it sounds like people are open to the idea.
I like that.
And an economic development.
I think it's a good combination of both internal folks of state government as well as external entities that could weigh in on behalf. I've had the chance to work with Rob, so I'm looking forward to working with him again, and know that just because he's retired doesn't mean he doesn't want to do any heavy lifting, so that's a good thing.
So we don't need to staff him. He'll do it himself.
We worked in an organization that needed some staffing, so we
What was
learned
that?
from our mistake. MEDC, Economic Development Council.
Okay, so let's think about people and areas and people. There is for your first meeting, one agenda item should be a briefing on the research project, because the statute does call for your advice. And Rachel Volberg, the PI, I'm sure will come and make a presentation Or by that time, we'll have our new Director of Research and Problem Gambling too, so just make sure that's on your agenda. Well, that's great, Rob.
Okay.
I'm really excited, and I'll certainly be there at all those meetings, or most of them.
Good.
And it wouldn't surprise me that other commissioners would come too. This is really exciting, and I appreciate your taking this on.
Well, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to suggest we take a break before we get to the next item. It now being, wow, it's 11:45. No wonder I'm taking a break. Shall we just go through? I mean, look, we're going to take a 5-minute break, but what about, should we take a lunch break? Or do you want to just see whether we can get through this before lunch? I'm game for anything.
I would favor the latter.
Get through it before lunch?
Right.
Yeah.
But
All right, so let's give that a shot. So let's take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll go back to it. All right, great. We will reconvene the 68th public meeting, and I think we will start out. Are we online again? Okay. We will start out by acknowledging that Commissioner Zuniga, I believe, has to leave. You've got a meeting to go to. Do I have that right? Or you've gone to?
You've gone to the meeting.
9:30 local time, right? I have an appointment
Right.
to go to.
12:30.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for getting up early and joining us.
Early now.
Nice to have you here.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have Attorney Blue, Counsel Blue.
If it would please the commission, I would like to ask that we consider a racing matter first that requires your vote before we dive into the application, and that way we can take our time with the application. We received a request last night from Suffolk to cancel 3 days of racing in June and move those days to November. So the request was that we would ask the commission to approve the cancellation of racing on June 11th, the 18th, and the 25th, and to move those dates to November 25th, 26th, and 27th. It will make no difference in the total number of days of racing. It's just a movement from June to November. That requires a vote of the commission because it changes the already approved schedule.
Do you know why it is? Why they want to do it?
There is some legislation about shortening the season as a whole, and that is in front of the legislature at the moment. So I think there is some sense that they want to see how that plays out, and by doing that, they'll move these days right now to the end of November, but if the season is shortened, they may want to make other changes.
Oh, I see.
Those are all Tuesdays, too.
Yeah,
They're
Mr.
all
Chair,
Tuesdays.
this is routine. This is something I'm familiar with from last year. It is anticipated that that legislation will be approved. It was the last 2 years to shorten the season. So this would typically be slower days. And in anticipation of that passing, they're just moving it to the end of the schedule for now.
Because they think that the later days are better.
No, they will not.
Oh, they're
Once the
hoping they'll lose those
legislation
days.
passes,
Yeah.
they will be authorized to shorten their season.
Okay, yeah.
So those days will
eliminated,
end
yeah.
up being canceled.
Got it, yeah, okay.
And if that does pass, then we will come back to the commission again to ask for an amendment to the schedule as a whole based upon the legislation.
Right. Okay, got it.
I would recommend approving, as this is a routine matter and one that we've typically approved in the past. And it makes sense to do that at this time.
Well, let's call that a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I don't know if Commissioner Zuniga is still here, so let's try it. Commissioner, we'll poll the commissioners. Commissioner Zuniga?
Yes.
Commissioner Stebbins?
Yes.
Commissioner Cameron?
Yes.
Commissioner McHugh?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Thank you.
So that's done.
Next on our,
Could we just,
One sec.
could we just ask Commissioner Zuniga to tell us when he leaves? Because I think at that point, we can consider this not any longer a meeting with extended participation, and
That's correct.
we don't have to worry about the roll
Yeah.
calls after that.
Commissioner Zuniga, did you get that? Will you just give us a heads up when you sign off?
Yes, I will leave in 10 minutes, but I can tell you when that is.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, back to business.
Next item is the application. We provided a list of all of the proposed changes to the application. We can either work from that list, or we can work from questions that you have, whichever is most convenient for the commission.
I would say probably going from the lit, obviously, we haven't had a chance to read this, obviously, so we're gonna have to go through it one by one, pretty much, right?
This is a list of the comments that we collected from all of the separate meetings that we had, as well as our review of things that should be in the application based upon the regulations and the statute, things that we may not have caught.
Right. Might as well go through this, might as well go with this document, is that all right?
Thank you. I would note that though we certainly made efforts to include all of the adjustments we thought that would need to be made on this list, we're still in the process of going through the general laws and the Commission's regulations to ensure that we've captured everything in here. And in fact, I would anticipate that there may be, I should also note that we've circulated this draft to our gaming consultants for their input as well. And
they've gotten back to you?
Some of them have started to respond. So I would anticipate that there may be further adjustments to the instructions and maybe additional disclaimers or language of that type that we may want to include in the application that's not on this list. But by and large, these are the issues that we've caught since we initially circulated this draft to you.
Well, there are a number of recommendations I made
Right.
that I take it are still in progress with respect to instructions.
Right.
Disclaimers, such things as adding what the schedule will be, such things as saying we have reserved the right to change this as we move downstream, a number of mechanical things, and I take it those two are still in play.
Yes, I meant to capture those as well. There were a number of recommendations from different sources that we're
Right.
still looking at and will likely recommend that we include here.
Okay.
But anyway, this was a good place to start, we thought, for today. This goes through by section, so we can just take it from the top. And the first one, in fact, is to the instruction section, where essentially it's just a disclaimer, and we had I think the matrix mostly in mind when we put this together, where we just note that to the extent that there are any inconsistencies between any policy documents or otherwise that are around out there that the application controls, and that although to the extent that there's any inconsistency between this and the law would control. So that's all that says. It was noted, a lot of these comments, as I may have mentioned, or Catherine mentioned, were derived from our conversations with you all. And one note was made essentially to the fact that since we have so many spaces for attachments, that we should just clarify that you're not required to attach 20 things if we have 20 spaces. So we would just add some language specifying that those are just spaces. There's no inference to be drawn from the fact that we put 20 spaces to attach items. Number 3, we think is a very important element to this application, and this is one that certainly the Commission will have to be comfortable with, and we can modify at this point if need be. But the concept was that within each section, within each question with each section, to the extent that it calls for an answer, as opposed to just attaching documents of some sort, that we included a box underneath the question, so that a brief summary of the response could be included. And that the application, by the physical application, the 200-plus pages, by the time it's submitted, would itself become a wholly public document, such that all the information contained in the boxes would be part of the public record. So what we want to explain to the applicants is that they are required to summarize the answer for which we expect they'll attach a written response to. But they'll provide a summary so that both the commission and the public can get a flavor as to what the answer is. And what we'll have to do, in addition to what we've already done, is highlight a few areas within each question that we would require information to be provided for. And we haven't done that yet. But for example, in the minimum capital investment section, where the question basically says calculate your total investment, we would require that they provide that number there and describe the process. And in other areas where we talk about marketing plans or other things that may certainly be subject to an exemption under the public records law, that a description of their plan be provided with the understanding that we're going to release the summary. So they don't need to include any items that may be potentially trade secrets or other areas that may be competitively sensitive, but that a description of an overall description be provided. So anyway, the point is that we do need to clarify our instructions on that point and modify the instruction that will appear on the application above the box. As it appears presently, we just have one uniform instruction. It'll have to be individualized a little bit.
This sentence says, "The commission will anticipate the public release of the entire 200-plus page unredacted application." Does that refer to everything but attachments?
Yes, so
Okay.
the plan would be, if the commission is comfortable with this, that the application was designed such that almost right when it comes in, we could hand out the application minus the attachments. Now, certainly some attachments will be a matter of public record, others clearly will not be. But that the information contained in the application form itself would be a matter of public record, including these summaries of the attached information. That would allow us to avoid some of the issues we had in the RFA1 process. And we'd be able to release information publicly fairly quickly. Obviously, we have to look at it. But if we put a number of reminders in and instructions as to what our plan is and how we anticipate this being processed, the hope would be that everyone would be aware of the fact that we plan on releasing summaries of different pieces of information. So it would be incumbent upon the applicant to just be careful with the information that it puts in the box, but at the same time make sure that it provides an apt description of whatever the question is.
I think it's a good idea. I think a lot of the general public, it's going to be the application page that they're going to probably review as opposed to all the myriad of attachments, but having something that's a little more detailed and succinct than just see attachment A below. Not very user-friendly, but I like the idea of the summary within that box.
I do too. I think it's interesting. It's got a very innovative approach, but I think it's a good idea.
Well, I thought your instructions on page 12 were really, like the rest of this, very good. And so I'm just not certain what needs to be clarified there, in your view. I thought they expressed the point, and I agree. I think this is really a terrific approach to this entire issue.
It may be okay. I just wanted to, maybe A, just bring it to the commission's attention that was the approach, and B, that was an area I think we just want to take another look at, even though it may be okay, but I think it's an important element here. We want to make sure we have it right.
Okay.
We thought that many things were clear in the first phase, and somehow they were not. So I think anytime you can give further instruction is probably a good idea.
Right.
And I love the approach as well.
It says that attachments may be exempt from disclosure. We will be specifying some stuff that right from the get-go that we're saying is going to be exempt from disclosure, right?
I think we will.
Yeah.
It may be difficult to project with any type of accuracy exactly what type of documents are going to be attached.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be one of the challenges we face. I think there are some obvious documents that will be attached that we can collectively decide would be presumptively exempt from public disclosure. But we don't really have a good way to figure out exactly what's going to be attached. So we'll have to offer some advice. One of the approaches that we had discussed taking would be for attachments, that the applicant be required to mark any attachment confidential or with some other language indicating that they believe that attachment or piece of that attachment to be confidential, and then we would review it as we reviewed the RFA1 applications to make the determination as to whether an exemption applied or it didn't apply, as opposed to us just starting from scratch and trying to figure out which ones we think are exempt or not.
Well, just think through the process. So the application comes in on December 31st. And we know from our experience that there will probably be a lot of claims of confidentiality. Somebody goes through, this isn't just an administrative review of completeness, this is now a substantive review about whether or not you accept it. For those you don't accept, you've got to go back to them and say, we don't accept this. They'll then debate it back and forth. There'll be conversations about possibly hearings and so on and so forth. So that could be a month-long process or multiple-week process. I guess the evaluation process is not compromised by that, though, right? That's kind of going on in the background while the process is going forward. So if this does induce an iterative debate, does that have any negative consequences on our schedule? That's what I'm getting at.
It should be able to go on in parallel with the evaluation process.
Right.
The commission will have access to the documents, so they could continue to review it, and we could address any confidentiality issues on the side.
Right.
And the beauty of this format is that while that debate is going on, the
entire application form
goes out,
yeah.
and any document not marked confidential goes out.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff that
Is Elaine picking this up? Yeah.
a lot of stuff that a lot of information is going to be out there right from the get-go under
Yeah.
this format. So
Yeah.
it's a great approach. I
Okay,
think.
good.
We will, of course, just have to go through the application and clarify which pieces of information we believe to be potentially exempt and not. That hasn't been done yet, but that'll be part of our further review. Number 4, we'll add just a space. The background section was designed to be fairly brief because it just has to have the basic information. It's not really part of the evaluation criteria. But we would just add a section to where the applicant would specify whether it's a Category 1 or Category 2. Hopefully that would be clear from the application, but we can't be too sure. Now, as far as the qualifiers, if you will, are concerned.
Could I just throw in something there?
Sure.
Have we, are we going to go through here and designate the questions that don't have to be answered by Category 2 applicants?
Yes, we are. And there's a couple of categories. There are some questions that are clearly not applicable to Category 2. There are other questions that it would be up to that Category 2 applicant to answer if they wanted to. So we'll have 2 different kinds of disclaimers, if you will.
Okay.
This doesn't apply. this may apply if it applies to you, answer it, otherwise give us a not applicable, because it is also very important that every question have an answer as the
Right.
people are going through to check and make sure whether the information is all there.
So so we'll have one application form that ones and twos will use, but it will tell you which ones to skip if you are at 2.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, there is a question in the financial section having to do with either the posting of a bond or deposit of money, where we note right on there it doesn't apply to category 2, and that's by statute.
Right.
So I think that whether we do that with the other questions or not, it'll be easy to flag which ones category 2 or don't apply to category 2.
Okay.
So in the background section, it's you'll recall that we added some language in our regulations where we basically said that the applicant will have to essentially attest to the fact that all the qualifiers who are deemed suitable still hold the same position within the applicant at the time the application is filed. What that may not cover, however, as was pointed out during one of our meetings, would be a situation where there's an additional qualifier since the suitability determination. So what we're proposing is adding some language which hasn't been drafted yet. It would be into A7 or even a new A8, where we ask that any new qualifiers or prospective qualifiers be identified. We do have regulations that govern that whole process, and that would still apply here, but that it be flagged in the application as well. So the commission will have a clear picture as to who all the qualifiers in fact are at the time it makes an award.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to excuse myself now.
Okay. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
sticking with us.
Thank you.
We have, at the beginning of every section, as you may have observed, we added a checklist. And in fact, there's a master checklist as well. And the checklist was intended to ensure, A, that the applicant has included everything they need to include, and secondly, to help facilitate the executive director's administrative review process. Everything on the checklist are basically the prerequisites set out by statute. So within each section, we have those. We also have a master checklist, and one of the number 6 on this list, we added language to the master checklist to ensure that the applicant has forwarded a copy of all the impact studies that it compiled in a number of different areas to all of the prospective surrounding communities. We discussed that in our regulations, that upon the filing, all the studies get sent to the prospective community, so they have access to that in aiding them in determining whether to petition to become a surrounding community, in the event they already haven't been. So we added that. Number 7, a number of these recommendations on this list basically came from our review of the regulations. And to the extent that the matrix language was not 100% aligned with the regulation or the statute, which is where most of the regulations came from, we've recommended just that we modify the language slightly to bring it in line with the regulation. So it doesn't change the intent of the placement of the element within the matrix, but it just modifies the language a little bit, and we've highlighted all of those areas here so you're aware of them. But otherwise, this stays true to the matrix. And number 7 is one of those areas. Oh, I'm sorry, I strike that. Number 7 was, this was actually not in there. This was kind of a unique piece of information. I got ahead of myself a little bit. This was a recommendation made by one of the commissioners that we just clarify that to require the identification of any diversity in the leadership and ownership of the applicant. Number 8, it was recommended that we use, instead of using the term financial for section 2, we use the term finance. So we've made that adjustment. Number 9, that, getting back to what I just said, this brings the application in closer alignment with the regulations relative to the timeline for construction. Number 10 is original language. That was a recommendation made by a commissioner to basically adjust some of the language that was contained in the matrix, just to clarify what type of information specifically that we're looking for there.
Yeah, this was something that I suggested. As I went through this, I realized that in our own evaluation criteria, sometimes we hadn't really written them very well. And I have a bunch of other ones, and it's our evaluation criteria that we really didn't clean up. That I hadn't read all of when I saw you. But what's the mechanism? I think it's good. I think it's better to perfect the language, and any of us, as we're reviewing the evaluation criteria, should clean it up. But what's the best mechanism to do this going forward? It's fairly non-controversial. Can I just give you a bunch of little edits? Yeah, okay.
Yes, that would be the easiest way to do
Okay.
it. Then we'll incorporate them in and circulate a revised application.
Okay, great.
Yeah, there are certainly a number of loose ends that were just kind of left open that definitely need to be addressed.
All right, okay, good.
And I don't know if it'd be helpful, but a lot of these on page 2 of this list are really just additions based upon the language of the regulations. Some of them are wholly new questions, so they're not in the matrix, but some of them are just additions to questions that did exist in the matrix. And number 11 is an example of a wholly new question, where basically, you'll recall, within the regulations, we asked for bank references, business and personal income and disbursement schedules, tax returns, et cetera, et cetera. So what this question does, this is not contained presently in the application. So with this question, the concept would be not that we request that the applicant resubmit everything that's already been submitted as part of the RFA1 process, but that they just supplement those documents to bring them up to the date as to when the application was submitted, if that would be helpful. As I said, everything else it basically comes right out of the regulations. I think number 14 is a good example of that. We have certainly workforce development questions and HR practice questions that are in the matrix and accordingly in the initial draft of the application. But when we went back to look at the regulations, we saw that the statute requires that we ask for further information. So what we've recommended here is just that we ask the question that the statute talks about.
Well, that's true. The next several,
Right.
page 3, page...
So the next one that does not fall into that category would be I think number 21. Well, maybe if we can fast forward to number 20 instead of 21. Number 20 is just a note that was put in relative to the size that the live entertainment venues can be. That comes right out of the statute. It's just highlighting the size in case for some reason someone is not aware of that. Make that clear right in the application. But number 21 is all new, and this language, which is not included in the matrix, but is included prominently in our regulations, deals with the MIPA process and the permitting process. And in fact, you'll recall in our regulations, we require a number of things, but one of them is that a chart be provided that identifies all of the anticipated permits that will be required, the status of some of the applications, or if an application has been filed, that be submitted, documentation relative to the MIPA process, the EIR, the ENF, all these documents that we talk about in the regulations were not captured in the matrix, and accordingly they weren't captured in the initial draft of the application. So that's what number 21 is. It talks about all of the permitting and MIPA-related requirements. Number 24 gets into, it's a similar type issue, although it is actually addressed in the present version of the application. And this is the section that talks about contributions and requests for contributions that you'll recall we've had fairly comprehensive discussions on what that language should say, what the commission is looking for. And I included it here because the language we have in the present application just needs to be broadened to capture the commission's position on what exactly it's looking for. And to, as we talked about in the regulation process, to just describe what types of requests you're interested in seeing identified, and not the request for new uniforms in Nevada, but the ones that were in Massachusetts, and use the application to explain exactly what we're looking for in that context. So that just needs to be updated a little bit here.
Do we need to decide on that language, or do you have?
I don't have language drafted yet. There's nothing in there at the present time. I think the language that's in there, I think, is a little under comprehensive. So we need to just broaden it a little. I haven't drafted anything yet, but certainly.
Do we need to have a policy decision as to what information we're looking for? I mean, this is one that we've been struggling with. And if so, when's the best time to do that? Do you want to draft something and we approve it, or what?
I think it would make sense to draft something. In the broader context of the application, as we've been looking at the kinds of changes we think we need to make in the size of the application, what we were thinking of was we would put language and draft it, and we would clean up the entire application. And perhaps, rather than try to issue this on June the 7th, we would bring this back at our June 13th meeting to give the commission one more time to go over it, because it is a lot of information. There are some things we want to consider, and I think we might need a little bit more time. So that's one of the issues where we would like to draft something, get some comments back from the commission, and tweak it.
Okay, because I think that's a good idea, because we've been dancing around that for a while.
Yeah.
We're going to leave it to the application to do the final.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
So here we are.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah. Number 26 we can strike. That just is the same thing as number 25. I'm not sure how that got in there, but number 27, we need to ensure that we request all of the information that is contained in the surrounding community section of the application, of the regulations. We've talked many times about the 3 ways that you can be designated a surrounding community. So this would just ensure that we request all the information we need to request. Number 29, there is language in the application presently that talks about the geographic exclusivity clauses relative to impacted live entertainment venues. But it seems as though we should consider just sticking to what the regulation says. So what this language mirrors the regulation a little more closely than the language that was in the application. It's fairly similar, but
This, I don't think this language scans properly. Maybe there's the word weather missing, but, well, two things. First of all, didn't we talk about what differences it makes, what difference does it make, what kind of exclusivity agreements they had, or regional, geographic agreements they had in other jurisdictions if they were not planning on using them in ours? What we care about is, I thought we, one of the, I think it was a comment from somebody, had said,
There was.
you know, why do you care what we do in other jurisdictions, if we're not gonna be using them here?
Well,
So that's
right.
one point, and then the second point is, I think there's at least a word missing in this, if it's gonna be a sentence.
as to the first part of the comment, I think this does capture that. We asked, it may need to be worded a little more clearly, but it is an either-or, it's intended to be an either-or. It's whether you intend to incorporate geographic exclusivity clauses here. And if the answer is yes, then you can really, I guess we don't really need to see what they look like in other jurisdictions.
And if the answer is no, you don't need to see it either. I think you just skip, you go from the word, within its proposed Massachusetts gaming establishment, comma, down to the last part, which is, and if so, the nature of such agreements. I think that whole past practice part is irrelevant to what I think.
Can I go back to 27 for a second? Sure. Do we have in the application any place where the applicant lists all the surrounding communities and attaches the surrounding community agreements that it's made with them? Is that already in the application?
I think so. And I believe that the way it's set up is that there are 3 questions that relate to the agreements. The first is to basically attach any executed surrounding community agreements you
Right.
have. So those communities would automatically be designated surrounding communities by the commission.
Right.
The second is this, which
Right.
is to list any community you believe the applicant
Right,
to be
right.
a surrounding community.
Right.
It just happens to be a community you have not executed an agreement with.
Okay.
And then we have a third category that I believe must have come off the matrix, where we basically ask them to list any communities that asked to be a surrounding community that the applicant denied.
Okay. All
So
right.
it's-
As long as that's all in there.
I believe that's all.
And those are questions 5-11 and 5-12.
Yeah, I see
I
that.
think in 5-12, we're going to add a sentence too that asks if there are any communities that were approached but declined
Yeah.
to enter into an agreement.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, 30, 31, 32 all relate to issues in the regulations and the statute.
Okay.
33, this is based on a statutory provision that's actually contained in our regulations as well, where the applicant is mandated to commit to the community mitigation plans in certain respects. So we needed to add an attestation that they agree to, well, this is actually a little broader than what the statute talks about. This here would seemingly require them to agree to commit to whatever is in their community mitigation plans. The statute is a little more narrow than that, and it talks about the community, only certain parts of the mitigation plans.
Okay.
And 34 gets back to what we discussed a little bit earlier. This is just an additional acknowledgement the applicant has read and understood the regulations, the law, and the instruction sections of this application, agrees to all of the obligations, terms, and conditions the law imposes upon the successful applicant. This would have to be in addition to any conditions that were agreed upon as part of the so-called negotiation process.
I'd recommend changing that the law imposes on the successful applicant something along the lines of all obligations, terms, and conditions contained therein. Obviously, if the law may be contrary to what one of the regulations says, for example, or somebody may be able to argue that, and we can't trump that.
Right.
But we can, by getting somebody to sign this, say they either agree or we know up front what the challenge is going to be. And either way, I think we're in a lot better shape. We would not want to get into a situation where somebody was awarded the license and then challenged some provision of one of our regulations that had some bearing on the license. We'd like to know that beforehand so we could work our way around it.
Okay.
You done? You've gone through this now?
That's the list. There's a few other issues, but
Yeah, go ahead.
The first thing that we just put on the list was the submission of the application. The regulations talk about filing 2 hard copies and 1 copy on CD. We've been advised that we do have or will have a server upon which an application could be uploaded. If we want to pursue that, that would basically be the equivalent of submission via CD. So the question before you, I guess, would be whether we want to allow for that or not.
We've been advised, who have we been advised by?
That we can do it?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have a secure system right now.
We're in the process of buying a server to put that on, so we could make whatever security provisions we need to. That is the general sense at the moment, that we will, while we don't have a document management system, we will have a system that will allow us to manage these documents on a separate server. So we can set up the security we need to make that work. This doesn't have to be obviously the only way that they provide it to us, and they can provide it to us on disk if they like, but this would be one option if we wanted to allow that, to let them upload it directly.
It was such a huge issue in the first phase, the document security. And we worked so hard at that, knowing we did not have the system in place yet. So I'm just a little hesitant to do that without having the right system in place and the right security measures in place.
Well, we can allow it. They don't have to use it if they're not comfortable with it.
We have to be comfortable with it as well.
Yeah, too.
But it's not just them.
Well, this would allow them to electronically submit, right, via the internet. And I agree with you. We need to be happy with the security arrangements. But if we could do that, it seems to me that'd be very helpful to have one CD that we don't put on a server so it can be shared by all the people that need to see it. Is going to be a real bottleneck to our efforts. So even if we get it on a CD, I would think that the ultimate home would be some kind of a server where we could share. So we need to work on the security for that and the permissions and the like. But
how are we going to work on that, though? That's my question. I don't know that we have the staff to do that right now unless we bring in someone who...
We have our document management consultant here now who could potentially help us with that. And we could get help from the IDT folks too.
And this wouldn't happen until December 31st. We've got we'll have a CIO by then, and we'll have been working on stuff, and we certainly have the ability to pull it together by then if we can put our minds to it.
Seems to me we have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah, I would hope we would too, but that was I know that was my question to you when I saw that was, whoa, we're not there yet.
Right.
Well, there's no, we need to make a decision what we print in the document. There's no harm in printing it in the document so that it's there, and if we turn out we don't use it, or they don't use it, that's all right.
Okay. So I think the other two things we've talked about already, the public records
Right.
and the category 2. So
Right, okay, good.
that's all for us.
I had a couple of other questions. We talked about the award. The license fee is due 30 days after the award, and we've now established that the vote is the award under the statute. And I don't know what the answer to this is, but it seems to me like $85 million is a lot of money to transfer irrevocably, just without any paperwork at all. You know, conceptually, I just can't imagine people, we have a vote, and there's a bunch of conditions and so forth. Have we thought through sufficiently well whether that is a sufficient indication, or ordinarily, when you give somebody $85 million as a deposit towards your work, there's a document that says, here's what we get for our $85 million. Maybe it's accepted, maybe it's that we've accepted their proposal, and the proposal, I don't know exactly, but have we thought that through? Is that fully realistic, that simply the vote of the commission will be enough to trigger the $85 million?
Well, we are thinking that through. Part of that is the form of the license, and we have to work with Executive Director Day on this as well. But my initial thought was we would have something prepared in a form so that once the vote was made, it could be very easily put together and then sent to the applicant, so they would have something.
Okay.
I agree with you that it would be expecting a lot for them to turn over that kind of money without an agreement, essentially.
Right.
So I think part of the process
Okay.
would be creating that form agreement so that it is ready to go once the vote is taken.
Okay. Okay, well, that's good, and I leave it to your capable hands to figure that out. I think we've got to make sure that everybody's expectations, that we've really chewed that one through, and that the expectations are set, because of if we do make the timeline, then we don't want to run afoul of the fiscal year just because we haven't really worked this through, and they say, give me a break, what about the this, that, or the other thing? So I think, maybe it's reasonable to have the bidders have a chance to participate in the development of that paperwork too. I don't know whether that's right or not, but just as long as we've really got that nailed down, so there's no ambiguity about the trigger mechanism when the time comes. Okay, so I have a bunch of word changes which I will give to you later on. Anything else on your agenda? We were going to talk about.
I had one
Yeah.
substantive
Anybody?
question that I overlooked, and that's on page 11 of this form, in which we're talking about this is part of the instructions, introductory presentation. And we talk about the presentation that's going to be about 2 weeks after the things are filed, limited to 90 minutes. But then it says, no questions will be asked of the applicants during the presentation. Where does that come from?
Yeah, good.
I missed that before.
We did talk about that, and I know Executive Director
Yeah.
Day had some thoughts that would not be a time for questions. It really would be the presentation itself. Am I
Yes.
remembering that correctly, Executive Director?
Yes, I do. I
Okay.
remember the discussion, and the idea was the 90-minute presentation by the applicant, so they're just presenting their proposal to the commissioners, and then the next applicant would present theirs, so the information is standard. The commission wouldn't be in a place where you're asking some questions of some applicants and not asking questions of the other. It would be that purpose to let them draw the picture of the applications for informational purposes, to let the process get us started with the evaluation.
So that if we had, thank you, so that if questions arose, then that'd be something for the commissioners to think about during the evaluation process, and then ultimately bring back to the public hearing if the evaluation process didn't provide the answers.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
I think that makes, I was struck by that language too, and I think that makes sense as a general principle, but I wonder whether we actually want to make it so we can't ask a question. You know, something might come up where we want to ask a question, notwithstanding the points you're making that are legit, just some point of clarification, you know, that, for example. And so I think for us to plan, I think substantively you're making a very important point. But I don't know whether we should take away our option of asking a question if we want to, that we decide is a harmless question to ask.
Or a question that is, I didn't understand that.
That's what I'm saying, like a point of clarification. Right?
I don't know.
It just seems like it'd end up being, whether we have to take away that ability or not may not be necessary, but I think the concept that if there's a clarification question asked, it seems like the commission would have to be very careful not to ask it differently of different applicants. Maybe make sure that that question was asked of the rest of the applicants as well. So maybe there's a process that.
Yeah.
Right. All right.
How well they explain is part of the.
Yeah, if we're thoroughly confused at the end of the presentation.
That would be taken into consideration.
It doesn't bode well.
I think that's the idea, is
Yes.
their opportunity to paint the picture that they want to be painted of the application, and then the evaluation process go forward.
Right, right. Okay. Okay.
You could say no questions other than those of clarification or something could be, just to give us the flexibility if we need it.
Yeah, or, yeah, I would feel a little more comfortable with that too, even though we didn't use it.
Right. Okay. I hadn't thought about it at all, but I think it's a really good principle to adhere to. Any other questions, issues? I think this is a great job. I mean, it's going to blow everybody's minds, but but I think you've really given us the tool to standardize the review, and if people comply, which they'll have to, it'll make the process of evaluating these things infinitely more manageable. So I think it's great.
Yes, and I think that in addition to that, it's a very innovative approach to the little summary and then the attachments, and the way the electronic submission is described on pages 8 and 9, I think really is going to be enormously helpful in getting things out the door quickly, and putting people on notice that, unlike the last time, if you don't put the label on there, you've waived your rights. And I think it's great.
Yeah. I think the checklist approach is also going to allow that additional licensed department review to go through and make sure we have the basic minimum, and hopefully shave off some time there. Not that they wouldn't leave a box unchecked, but make sure they know we have all the documents in line. It's a great job.
Okay, so you done with that item in your agenda?
That's right.
Okay, so what would the next step be? We would consider this, you'd go back and fix it, do whatever else needs to be done, circulate it again, and then we'd formally approve it at our next meeting? Is that the plan?
Yes, that would be our proposed plan.
Okay.
Okay, great. In the context of the evaluation, of the application, I wanted to talk a little bit about the evaluation criteria. I circulated that my memo from Atlantic City yesterday, and it raised some, if you've had a chance to read it, I don't know if you have.
I didn't have a chance to go through it.
Whether or not we might want to clarify some of the evaluation criteria. And we can talk about it a little bit now if you want to, or.
Sure.
Just the several things that struck me, the whole iGaming business, we do have one clear question about iGaming. And I think it talks about how do you plan to protect your market, given the context of evolving. But I wonder whether we should ask people for their iGaming strategies. I mean, it's not legal in Massachusetts yet, but I think knowing what they're thinking about iGaming might be a criteria that we would find very useful. So that was one. A second one is how do they plan to market? The way the casinos in other jurisdictions that presently have working relationships with Massachusetts citizens, we want to repatriate those dollars. That's one of the whole points here. And they're going to be doing everything they can to keep the dollars going to their current casino. That's fine. But they've got these databases of information and frequent player credits and so on and so forth, where they will have a tremendous head start. There's probably millions of people, certainly hundreds of thousands of Massachusetts citizens in other people's databases by now. And I wonder whether we would want to specifically ask, how do you market against that? That would be another criteria that I think we would find very interesting. The third thing that came to my mind it was emphasis. All these things are things we've talked about. They were just kind of crystallized when I was at this conference. The declining revenue that's owing to gaming as opposed to other amenities as a share of total revenue for these facilities is pretty dramatic. And we've talked a lot about a destination resort casino, although, as I said in this memo, I've learned now that there's another phase. There's convenience casinos, there's destination resort casinos, and there's now something people refer to as city-integrated casinos. Or it could be region, it doesn't have to be just a city, but something that's your facility is marketing the whole area. You're marketing Boston, or you're marketing Springfield, you're not marketing your casino. And you collaborate, and we've talked a lot about that. But everybody's beginning to be sensitive to this because now that the market is saturated, you're going to need other distinguishing characteristics. It isn't enough just to have good table games and slots because everybody's got them. So how do you get people to come to your facility? So I'm wondering whether we ought to tighten or sharpen that request for strategy, in a saturated market. How do you market the whole region, and how do your anticipated revenues protect against the decline in competition, something like that. I think those were the primary thoughts that I had. I guess.
I think all of them are no, I thought all of them were good, and we are looking to find the differences between very good proposals and those kinds of questions. I thought on page 62 was where we talked about iGaming. An additional question there would be appropriate. Not only describe, how do they maintain, but what are their real ideas about iGaming and incorporating it.
Right. Okay, so I'll propose some language to amend the evaluation criteria, sharpen the evaluation criteria along these various points. I'll send you my memos too. I gave it to Rick, but I didn't give it to you guys. Okay, let's see. Do we have anything else? I don't think we do. Anybody else? Agenda items, questions? Okay, let's adjourn and have lunch. Thank you, everybody. Good job.
Great job with this. Excellent job.